13 of the most lethal snipers on the planet. 13 shots fired at a steel plate smaller than a door frame, sitting 4,000 meters across a Nevada desert that wanted to kill everything that moved through it. 13 misses. The best of the best, Navy SEALs, Marine Scouts, Army Rangers, stood at that firing line and walked away with nothing but shell casings and bruised pride. Then a woman nobody in that crowd had ever heard of stepped forward, pulled off her boots, pressed her bare feet into ground hot enough to blister skin, and said quietly, almost to herself, "Give me 2 shots." If you're new here, subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like this video, and stay with me until the very end. Because what happened next at Raven Ridge changed how the military thinks about what a human being is truly capable of. The morning the impossible challenge opened, the Nevada desert was already trying to kill everyone at Raven Ridge Tactical Range. By 0700, the temperature had climbed to 94 degrees. By 0930, it was pushing past 106. The kind of heat that doesn't just sit on your skin, it reaches down into your chest cavity, wraps around your lungs, and squeezes. The kind of heat that makes the horizon look like a smear of petroleum jelly, that bends and warps everything at distance until you can't trust what your eyes are telling you. The sky was a hard, flat white. Not blue, not quite. The color the desert turns when the sun gets serious about punishing whatever's foolish enough to be standing underneath it. Raven Ridge was not a public installation. It didn't appear on civilian maps. The access road was a 40-minute drive from the nearest 2-lane highway through nothing but scrub brush and dry creek beds. The facility itself was a collection of low concrete structures, a long-covered observation platform, a series of reinforced firing positions, and, at the far end of the valley, a series of steel target frames mounted on hydraulic anchors sunk 3 feet into hardpan. The range had been carved out of the basin specifically for this kind of evaluation. Long-distance precision work, where the environment itself was the adversary, where you couldn't control a single variable except yourself. The target at 4,000 meters had been placed there 6 days earlier. It was a standard E-type silhouette frame, the kind used in advanced qualification courses, but smaller. Someone in range operations had cut it down by nearly a third. The steel plate was roughly 18 inches wide, 24 tall. At 4,000 meters, through Nevada heat shimmer and variable crosswind, it was effectively invisible to the naked eye. Through a high-power scope, it appeared roughly the size of a thumbnail at the end of a 4-kilometer barrel of moving, unstable, deceptive air. Nobody had hit it yet in pre-qualification testing. Nobody expected anyone to hit it today either. This was, according to the official documentation filed with the Joint Special Operations Evaluation Board, a calibration exercise, meaning that its primary purpose wasn't to produce a successful hit, but to gather data. Ballistics data, atmospheric data, shooter performance data under stress conditions. A calibration exercise was military language for, we don't actually expect this to work, but we need to see how badly everyone fails. The 13 shooters knew this. They had read the documentation, they understood the parameters. And to a man, every single one of them believed that understanding something was a problem, and believing they were the one who would finally solve it, were 2 entirely different animals, and most of them quietly believed they were the one. They arrived in 3 vehicles just before 0800. The first 2 trucks carried 11 of the shooters, a collection of special operations veterans, senior NCOs, and 1 recently retired warrant officer who'd spent the better part of 2 decades in direct action units across 4 combat theaters. They moved with the particular economy of motion that long-service operators develop, the kind of efficiency that doesn't waste a single movement, doesn't perform anything for an audience. They unpacked their equipment in near silence. Cases opened, actions checked, scopes dialed. The language they used with each other was clipped, technical, comfortable. The shorthand of men who had been in the same rooms under the same pressure enough times that full sentences felt like an inefficiency. The third vehicle arrived 8 minutes later, a standard gray government SUV that parked at the far end of the staging area. Captain Mason Cole watched it arrive from his position at the equipment tables. He was 41, lean in the way that long-distance runners are lean, not built, just stripped of everything unnecessary. His hair was cut close enough to show the shape of his skull, and there was a scar that ran from just below his left ear to the edge of his jaw. A souvenir from a training accident in his third year with SEAL Team 3 that he never explained to anyone outside the teams. His eyes were the particular kind of pale gray that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. He watched the SUV park. Watched a woman climb out of the passenger side. She was maybe 5'4". She wore standard-issue desert utilities, the kind that said nothing about who you were or where you'd been. No patches visible. She carried a hard case, medium-sized, that she moved without difficulty. She walked toward the range coordinator's table at a pace that was neither rushed nor slow, just purposeful, and handed over her credentials without ceremony. Cole turned back to his equipment. "Who's the addition?" he said not loudly, to the man beside him. Senior Chief Petty Officer Garrett Walsh looked up from his spotting scope case. He was the kind of man who processed information slowly on the outside and fast on the inside, a deliberate quality that sometimes got mistaken for being slow. He looked at the woman at the coordinator's table, then back at Cole. "Don't know," Walsh said. "Came in on a separate travel order. Hale requested her." Cole's jaw moved slightly. "Hale requested her." "That's what the coordinator told me." Cole said nothing else. He went back to his equipment. But retired Master Chief Victor Hale was 63 years old and had no business being at Raven Ridge in any official capacity. He had retired from active service 9 years earlier after 31 years in naval special warfare, the last 8 as one of the senior sniper course instructors at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. He was present today as a civilian consultant, a role that carried exactly 0 authority and approximately infinite weight, because everyone on that range had either trained under him directly or knew someone who had. He was a large man. Not tall, about 5'10", but wide in the chest and shoulders in the way that men who've done physical labor their whole lives carry themselves, like weight is something they've long since made peace with. His hair was white. His hands were the size of catcher's mitts and looked like they'd been put together from spare parts. He wore civilian clothes, tan cargo pants, a plain blue shirt, and a battered ball cap that said absolutely nothing on it. He met Commander Elena Voss at the coordinator's table and shook her hand. "Glad you made it," he said. "How's the drive?" "Long," she said. "Lot of nothing between here and the highway." "That's Nevada." He picked up her equipment case before she could reach for it, and she let him, which told him something. "You eat this morning?" "On the road. There's coffee. It's terrible." "Good," she said. "I need something to be angry about." Hale almost smiled. Almost. What? Commander Elena Voss was 38 years old. She held a Naval Special Warfare designation that placed her in a category so narrow it didn't have a common name, one of a small number of women who had completed modified assessment and selection pipelines for specialized support and direct action advisory roles during the period when the services were working through the mechanics of expanded integration. She had not gone through BUDS. She had gone through something adjacent to it, parallel to it, that in practical terms asked many of the same questions of the body and mind. The specifics were not in any document that circulated outside a particular subset of personnel files. What her file did show, to those who could access it, 2 deployments to Afghanistan in an advisory role embedded with Special Operations Task Forces. 1 deployment to an unspecified location in the Horn of Africa. A 3rd tour that was largely redacted. Qualification scores across multiple weapons systems that sat in the top percentile of her evaluation cohorts. A particular notation, flagged by 2 separate commanding officers, about an ability to read environmental conditions without instrumentation that they described in the measured language of official reports as exceptional and operationally significant. What her file didn't show, the 18 months she'd spent after her first deployment sitting in a small room in a building on a naval installation in Southern California, working through accumulated environmental data from 240 long-range engagements, studying not the shots that hit, but the ones that missed, and what the air, the ground, and the atmosphere had been doing when they missed. Building a mental model from the bottom up, not from doctrine, from observation. She had not talked about this to anyone except Victor Hale. Hale had assigned her that room. The formal briefing began at 0900 under the covered observation platform. The range safety officer, a Navy lieutenant commander named Torres, who had the tight-wound energy of someone who'd been managing high-risk evaluations for too long, ran through the parameters in the clipped factual language of official briefings. 4,000 meters to target. Standard atmosphere corrections as baseline. Wind sensors positioned at 5 points along the range corridor at intervals of 800 meters. Atmospheric data updated every 30 seconds and fed to shooter positions via tablet display. Each shooter would be allocated 3 rounds maximum. Scoring based on impact point, with partial credit for rounds landing within a defined proximity zone around the target frame. A man near the middle of the group, Sergeant Major Derek Rains' Army, looked like a piece of old teak furniture that someone had put a uniform on. Raised his hand. 3 rounds maximum, Rains said. What's the expectation on round 1? Torres looked at him without expression. Round 1 is calibration. You're expected to use it to gather impact data. Meaning miss on purpose. Meaning use it intentionally. Rains nodded slowly. Right. He didn't ask anything else. Cole was watching Elena during the briefing. She wasn't taking notes. Everyone else had tablets or paper. She was standing slightly apart from the group, and she wasn't looking at Torres, wasn't looking at the downrange target, which was invisible anyway at this distance without optics. And she wasn't looking at her equipment. She was looking at the valley floor. Specifically, she was watching the mirage, the heat shimmer that rose from the desert surface in slow, undulating columns, the way it moved and bent and changed direction over intervals of seconds. She was watching it with the focused, unhurried attention of someone reading a newspaper on a Sunday morning. Cole looked away. The shoot order had been determined by seniority and specialty rating. Cole was third. The first shooter was Gunnery Sergeant Patrick Ochoa, Marine Force Reconnaissance, 22 years in service, a qualification record that his unit kept laminated somewhere because the original had started to curl. He settled into the firing position with the practiced comfort of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. His spotter, Walsh, who was serving in the dual capacity of spotter for multiple shooters today, fed him wind data from the closest sensor array. Wind at position is 4.7, left to right, Walsh said. Sensor 3 is showing 6.1, same direction. Sensor 5 is showing 4.2, right to left. Switching. Confirmed switch. Ochoa spent 4 minutes in the prone position before his first round. The rifle was a custom-configured Macmillan TAC-50, chambered in 50 BMG, a round that at distance was less a bullet than a small aerospace vehicle. It left the muzzle at approximately 2,900 feet per second. At 4,000 meters, that translated to roughly 8 seconds of flight time. 8 seconds of exposure to everything the atmosphere chose to throw at it. The crack of the shot broke the silence of the valley so abruptly that 2 desert birds exploded out of a scrub bush 40 meters to the east. 8 seconds. The spotting scope caught the impact, dust rising from the hardpan approximately 6 feet left of the target frame and 2 feet low. Miss, Walsh said. 6 left, 2 low. Ochoa's jaw worked. He fed the data, recalculated, and settled again. Wind shifting, Walsh said. I see it. Second shot, 8 seconds. The impact dust rose, this time high, 18 inches above the plate's upper edge. Ochoa had 1 round left. The range coordinator made a note. His final shot was the closest. It struck the steel frame itself, 3 inches from the plate, producing a sharp metallic ring that carried across the valley like a hammer on a pipe. But it wasn't the plate. It wasn't center. It wasn't a score. He unloaded, cleared, and stood up from the firing position. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked back to the staging area and began breaking down his spotting equipment with the mechanical focus of a man who needed something to do with his hands. The second shooter lasted longer at the position, but produced worse results. Senior Chief Marcus Del Rey, Naval Special Warfare, 15 years, had a reputation built around patience. But patience in this context became its own problem. He spent so long waiting for the right window that the atmospheric conditions cycled 3 times, and by the time he fired, the wind at Sensor 3 had shifted 15 degrees from his calculated hold. Both of his scoring rounds missed outside the proximity zone. Cole took the firing position third. He settled into the prone with the ease of someone who lived there. This was his most natural state. Behind the rifle, the world reduced to the small circle of the scope, everything outside it irrelevant. The scope was a custom-configured Night Force ATACR, 735 power, With a first focal plane reticle, he'd had adjusted for his particular visual processing preferences over 3 years of use. He knew this glass the way most people know their own handwriting. Walsh moved beside him. "Wind at position," Walsh said, reading the tablet. 3.8, left to right. Sensor 2 is showing 4.1, same direction. Sensor 3? He paused. Sensor 3 is showing variable, switching between 5.2 and 3.6 over a 20-second cycle. Cycle timing? 18 to 22 seconds, irregular. Cole processed this. Variable wins at distance, predictable wins at position. He would need to time his shot to the low end of the Sensor 3 cycle, compress the atmospheric window. He began the process of settling his heart rate. It was a technique he'd refined over years, not mystical, just physiological. Controlled breathing, muscle relaxation from the feet up, deliberate. His heart rate dropped from its resting 63 to somewhere in the mid-40s. At this rate, he could feel each individual beat as a slight tremor through his body, and he learned to fire in the quarter-second rest between beats. He watched the mirage through the scope. Behind him, about 20 meters, he was aware in the peripheral way of long-distance shooters, not consciously processing, just registered, that the woman had moved. She was no longer standing with the group at the observation platform. She was standing about halfway between the platform and the firing position, at the edge of the concrete, looking downrange. Cole dismissed it. "Sensor 3 cycling to low end," Walsh said. "You've got a window." Cole's breathing slowed further. He took the shot. The crack of the 50 BMG hit the valley like a physical force. 8 seconds. The impact dust rose, right of the plate. 2 feet right, roughly on line for elevation. "Miss," Walsh said. 2 right, on elevation. Cole recalculated. The wind near the target was running faster than the sensor data suggested. The heat distortion was compressing the apparent distance, making the target look closer than it was. He was about to communicate this to Walsh when a voice came from behind him, not loud, not directed at him specifically, just present. "The mirage near the target is running opposite direction to Sensor 5. Cole turned his head. Elena was standing 8 feet behind the firing position. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the downrange valley with the same unhurried attention he'd noticed during the briefing. He looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at the tablet. "Sensor 5 is showing right to left. The mirage near the plate," Elena said, still not looking at anyone, "is running left to right. You can see it in the shimmer pattern at the base of the target frame." Cole looked through his scope. The target frame was barely resolvable at this distance, even at 35 power magnification. The shimmer at its base was... He studied it. The shimmer pattern. The direction of the lean in the rising heat columns. She was right. If Sensor 5 is reading right to left and the actual surface condition near target is left to right, Elena continued, same flat observational tone, you've got a wind inversion somewhere between Sensor 4 and 5. The bullet's going to hit that inversion and push right. Cole stared through the scope for another 3 seconds. He came up out of the firing position, not dramatically, just lifted his head and turned to look at her. "Who cleared you to approach the firing line, Shad?" he said. She looked at him then. Her expression was not apologetic. It was not confrontational either. It was simply direct, the expression of someone who was telling you something true and was neither invested in your reaction nor particularly concerned about it. "Range safety didn't designate this position as hot until you assumed the prone," she said. "I'm outside the line." She was. Technically. "I don't need unsolicited input," Cole said. "I know," she said, and she walked back to the observation platform. Cole looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at his tablet. Cole got back into the firing position. He made an adjustment, not the adjustment she'd described, but a different one, his own calculation, accounting for a wind inversion, but placing it at a different point in the corridor. He took his second shot. The impact dust rose 2 feet left of the plate. He had moved the shot in the wrong direction. There was a 15-minute break between every 3 shooters to allow atmospheric data to refresh and equipment to be checked. Cole sat on a bench at the staging area, and he did not look at Elena, who was standing 40 meters away with Hale, both of them watching the downrange valley in that particular way she had, the way that wasn't looking at a target but reading something. Rains came and sat beside Cole. "She called your miss," Rains said. Cole looked at him. 3 other people were close enough to hear her, Rain said. She called it before your second shot landed. Cole said nothing. I'm not saying anything, Rain said, just noting. She was guessing, Cole said. Rains nodded slowly. Sure. He stood up. What's she cleared for exactly? Do you know? No, Cole said. Might be worth knowing, Rain said, and he walked away. For what? The next 4 shooters produced the same results as the first 3. Missed. Some by inches, some by feet. 1 round struck the target frame, not the plate, hard enough to leave a mark, and the shooter, a ranger sergeant named Whitfield, stared at the spotting scope data for a long time before accepting it. Elena did not approach another firing position during this period, but Cole watched her because something had shifted in him that he couldn't entirely dismiss or explain. She was moving differently than the other observers. Most of the non-shooting personnel were either watching through spotting scopes or watching their tablets. Elena was doing neither. She had walked, slowly, about 300 meters down the valley floor to the east of the main firing line, within the range safety boundary, on the flagged corridor. And she was crouching near the ground, her hand pressed flat against the desert hardpan. Cole didn't know what she was doing. He didn't ask. By the time the 7th shooter, a Marine scout named Devereaux, stepped to the firing position, the wind had changed character. Not direction, not significantly, but the quality of it had changed. Desert wind in the afternoon doesn't blow like coastal wind, doesn't blow like mountain wind. It comes in surges and drops, in pulses, with irregular intervals that don't fit any clean mathematical model. The sensors were capturing data, but data from sensors is already old by the time it displays. It's telling you what the wind was doing, not what it's doing. Devereaux's first shot missed low and right by approximately 3 feet. His second shot was closer, 8 inches right, on elevation. A near miss that produced a sound from the observation group, a collective intake of breath that released as a murmur when the spotter called the miss. He spent 4 minutes calculating his third shot. When it landed 2 inches left of the plate's edge, producing a sound, another ring from the frame, the coordinator made a note and 3 men simultaneously made sounds of frustration. Devereaux stood up from the firing position and pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes for a moment. Not a dramatic gesture, just a man with 2 inches of failure to process. That's the closest anyone's gotten, Walsh said, coming to stand beside Cole. 2 inches. Off the plate is off the plate, Cole said. Still. Cole looked toward Elena. She had come back from the valley floor and was standing again at the edge of the observation platform. Her expression told him nothing. She was watching the flag markers positioned at intervals downrange, the small orange streamers that the range had positioned at 200-meter intervals to give shooters a visual reference for wind at distance. The third flag from the left was moving differently from the others. Not by much. A slight, stuttering irregularity in its movement pattern, a hesitation, and then a surge, where the others moved in a smoother, more continuous pattern. Cole looked at it for 5 seconds. Then he looked at Elena, who was already looking at him. He looked away first. The next 2 shooters, both Army, both with combat deployments and advanced sniper qualifications, produced 4 more misses between them. 1 round struck within the proximity zone, but outside the scoring threshold. The range safety officer was quietly adding data to a document that, Cole suspected, would eventually conclude that the challenge parameters were outside achievable performance margins. He was up again. 9th in the rotation. Walsh sat up beside him. Atmosphere's changed since your last shot. Sensor data is... Tell me what the flags are doing, Cole said. Walsh paused. Flags? The streamers. Flag 3 from the left. Compare it to flag 2. Walsh looked up from the tablet. He found the flags at distance through his spotting scope. He watched them for a moment. Flag 3 is irregular, he said, stuttering. Flag 2 is smoother. Something in that corridor is creating a local variation, Cole said. Heat differential off a rock formation, air from the East Valley Channel. Whatever it is, the sensors aren't capturing it. Flag 3 is telling you there's an inversion in that zone. Walsh looked at his tablet, then back at the flags. How long have you been watching that? Walsh said. Cole didn't answer. He settled into the firing position. He applied a hold that accounted for the inversion, adjusting his windage to compensate for what he believed the bullet would do when it hit the disrupted air in Flag 3's corridor. He waited for the cycle. He took the shot. 8 seconds. The impact dust rose left, but not 2 feet left. 14 inches left. He had moved the shot in the right direction. He had closed the gap. But the magnitude of the inversion was larger than he'd calculated. He adjusted again. Third shot. 8 seconds. The impact was 6 inches left of the plate's near edge. 6 inches. He had come within 6 inches of solving it, and he was out of rounds. Cole got up from the firing position. He didn't look at anyone immediately. He walked to the staging area and set his rifle in the case and stood there looking at nothing for a moment. 6 inches. Walsh came up beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. "I had it wrong on the magnitude," Cole said finally. "The inversion is bigger than I read." "You had the direction right," Walsh said. "Direction without magnitude is still a miss." Walsh nodded. "Yeah." "She saw that 3 hours ago," Cole said. "The inversion. She told me before my second shot." Walsh didn't say anything. "I adjusted in the wrong direction because I didn't trust her read," Cole said. "I had my own calculation and I didn't want to throw it out." Walsh looked at him steadily. "What do you want me to say, Captain?" "Nothing," Cole said. "I'm not looking for someone to make me feel better about it." He closed the equipment case. "How many shooters left?" "4." Cole nodded. He sat down on the bench and picked up the atmospheric data tablet and began reading it with the focused attention of a man who was no longer computing his own attempt, but trying to understand what he'd missed. The 4 remaining shooters fired their rounds across the next 90 minutes. The range became a different kind of quiet during this period. Not the empty quiet of the morning, but the compressed quiet of collective failure, of a group of highly capable men cycling through the recognition that they were facing something that might not have a solution. Not in the way ordinary things don't have solutions, but in the way certain military problems don't have solutions. Not because they're impossible, but because the right person hasn't tried them yet. Each set of shots produced data. Each shot contributed to a narrowing picture of what the atmosphere above that 4,000-meter corridor was doing. Individually, no shooter had enough rounds to map the full picture. Collectively, across 13 shooters, the picture was beginning to resolve. Cole was seeing it. He had the tablet, and he had the impact data from all 12 shooters who'd gone before him, and he was building something in his head that the sensors weren't showing, a map of where each shot had gone relative to where the shooter calculated it would go, and the delta between them. The delta was the information. The delta was the atmosphere telling you what it was actually doing. He brought the tablet to Walsh. "Look at the drift pattern," Cole said. "Every shot from shooter 1 through 7 is drifting right of calculated. 8 through 12, it's inconsistent. Some right, some left. What changed?" Walsh studied the data. Shooter 8 was Randall. He used a different hold calculation. "No, look at the timestamps. The wind shifted at approximately 1320, Cole pointed. The inversion didn't move, but the feeding wind changed direction. The inversion started working differently after 1320. Walsh stared at the data. Walsh stopped. "That's actually a real pattern." "It means the correction isn't static," Cole said. "It's time-dependent. The inversion magnitude is going to keep changing as the afternoon heats up. It'll probably peak somewhere around 1500 and then start dropping off as the sun angle changes." Walsh looked at him. "You're not in the rotation anymore, Captain." "I know," Cole said. He looked toward the firing positions. Elena was the last shooter. She had been assigned the final position not by seniority or specialty rating, but because Hale had requested it, and the coordinator had simply placed her there as the administrative last entry on a list that everyone had treated as a formality. She was standing at the edge of the concrete, looking at the valley. Cole watched her for a moment, then walked toward her. She didn't turn when he approached. She was watching the flag markers with that same particular attention, not staring, not focused on any single point, but taking in the whole visual field in the way that some people can only do when they've trained themselves to stop prioritizing. Cole stopped beside her. He didn't say anything immediately, neither did she. "The inversion is time-dependent," he said. She turned to look at him. "The magnitude is increasing as the afternoon heats up," he said. "Based on the drift pattern across all 13 shooters, I think it's going to peak around 1500. That's about 40 minutes from now." She looked at him steadily. "You already know this," Cole said. "Yes," she said. "How long have you known?" She looked back at the valley. "About 3 hours." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you say anything?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was without inflection, without apology, without any particular shading. "Would you have listened?" Cole held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. The desert gave no answer to that. Just heat and wind and a steel plate 4 kilometers distant that was waiting for someone to finally understand it. Hale came to stand beside Cole as Elena walked toward the firing position. "She's going to wait," Cole said. "Yes," Hale said, "for the peak." "For the right moment," Hale said. "Those aren't the same thing." Cole looked at him. "What does that mean?" Hale watched Elena settle in behind the rifle. She didn't assume the prone immediately. She sat beside the firing position, cross-legged on the concrete, and she placed both hands flat on the ground beside her, and she closed her eyes. Cole stared. "What is she doing?" he said. Hale didn't answer right away. He was watching Elena with an expression that wasn't pride exactly, too complicated for pride. More like the expression of someone who had built something carefully over a long time and was now watching it do what it was built to do. "The same thing she's been doing since she got here," Hale said. "Listening." Cole looked at the woman sitting on the concrete with her eyes closed and her hands on the ground in 110 degrees of Nevada desert, and something moved in him that he didn't have a name for. Not respect exactly. That would come later. Right now it was closer to discomfort. The particular discomfort of a man who has been certain about something for a long time and has just felt that certainty shift beneath him like sand. He turned away from the firing position. He walked back to the staging area and sat down. And he waited, the same as everyone else, for whatever came next. At 1447, Elena removed her boots. She placed them beside the firing position with the same deliberate care she'd brought to everything else today. Not hastily, not ceremonially, just precisely. She peeled off her socks. She pressed both bare feet against the scorching concrete. The group on the observation platform went silent. Someone, Cole couldn't see who, made a short, disbelieving sound. Not laughter, something involuntary. The sound you make when you see something that doesn't fit your categories. Walsh was beside Cole again. "She's barefoot," Walsh said. "I see that," Cole said. "Why is she barefoot?" Cole didn't answer. Elena had moved now from sitting into the prone position, the rifle settled against her shoulder, her cheek on the stock, her eyes at the scope. Her bare feet were spread slightly, toes pressed into the concrete, heels slightly elevated. She didn't move for 4 minutes. Not a conventional 4 minutes. Not the patient stillness of a shooter waiting for a window. This was something different. This was complete. There was no micro-adjustment, no involuntary muscle response, none of the small constant corrections that even the most disciplined shooters make. She was there, and then she was somewhere else inside there. Inside the stillness, inside the heat and the wind and the data moving up through the ground and through her feet and through her hands where they made contact with the rifle and the concrete. Cole found himself leaning forward slightly. He didn't realize he was doing it until Walsh glanced at him. He sat back. The range was completely quiet now, the heat pressed down. A dust devil rose about 300 meters east of the firing line, spun for 11 seconds, and dissolved. Elena's right hand moved, a slight rotation, an adjustment that could not have been more than 2 clicks of the elevation turret, one of the windage. The movement was so economical it was almost invisible. She stilled again. The wind at Flag 3 made its irregular, stuttering movement, hesitated. Then for exactly 4 seconds, ran smooth. Elena fired. The crack of the shot tore through the valley with the same physical force as every shot before it, the same displacement of air, the same assault on the eardrums. 8 seconds. Cole's eyes were at the spotting scope. Walsh had binoculars pressed to his face. Every person on the observation platform was looking downrange through whatever glass they had. The valley was silent for 8 seconds, in the way that only a desert can be silent, completely, absolutely, with the sun pushing down from above and the heat rising from below and nothing in between but anticipation. Then the sound came. Not the flat thud of a round impacting hard pan, not the sharp ring of steel frame. A different sound, a deep resonant clang that carried back across 4,000 meters with a clarity that shouldn't have been possible, that arrived in the ears of everyone on that range like a physical statement. The plate. Dead center. Walsh lowered his binoculars. His face had an expression Cole had never seen on it before. Walsh, who had been a Master Chief for 6 years and had been in situations that would have dissolved most men. Walsh's face had the expression of a man who has just witnessed something his brain is still in the process of categorizing. Cole didn't move from the spotting scope immediately. He was looking at the target frame, at the plate, at the mark in the center of the plate where the round had impacted, dead center. After a long moment, he pulled back from the scope. Nobody said anything. And in that silence, in the gap between the impossible thing that had just happened and whatever was supposed to happen next, something landed in Cole's chest that was uncomfortable and accurate and already beginning the process of rewriting something he'd believed about himself for a long time. He had dismissed her before she fired a round. He had dismissed her warning, her read, her method, her presence. And she had done it. She had done it with 2 shots when 13 of them, 13 of the best, had burned through 39 rounds and come away with nothing. The range coordinator's voice came over the range intercom, mechanical and procedural and completely inadequate to the moment. Confirmed impact, scoring plate. Round 2 of shooter 14, impact zone, center mass. A beat of silence. Then, from somewhere in the group on the observation platform, a sound began to rise. Not cheering exactly, not the triumphant noise of a sporting event. Something more complicated than that. Something that had disbelief at its base, and something else building on top of it that none of them had the words for. Cole sat in the staging area. He did not make a sound. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at the target frame 4 kilometers away, then at Elena, who had come up from the prone position and was sitting beside the rifle on the concrete, and she was not looking at the target or the group or the celebration beginning to build around her. She was looking at the valley floor, still listening, and somewhere in Cole's chest, something that had been solid for a very long time cracked cleanly in half. Not loud, not dramatic, just split, the way good timber splits when you find the grain and hit it exactly right. The celebration didn't last long. That was the first thing Cole noticed from the staging area. The way the noise rose, crested, and then began to flatten almost immediately, like a wave that had traveled too far from its source and was losing form before it hit shore. There was applause. There were a few voices. But underneath all of it was something that nobody on that range was quite prepared to metabolize, and the sound it made when it tried to find an exit was something between discomfort and awe. And those 2 things don't mix cleanly. Hale walked to the firing position and said something to Elena that nobody else heard. She nodded once. She was putting her socks back on. The range coordinator, Torres, was on his radio. His voice was low, clipped, and from the body language. The way he'd turned slightly away from the group. The way his free hand was moving in that unconscious gesture of a man who's trying to process something while simultaneously reporting it. Cole understood that Torres was talking to someone above him in the chain, and that whoever was on the other end of that conversation was having the same difficulty with the information that everyone at Raven Ridge was currently having. Cole stood. He picked up his equipment case and carried it to the vehicle line and set it in the back of the truck and stood there for a moment with both hands on the tailgate. 6 inches. He'd come within 6 inches, and she'd put it dead center on her second round, with bare feet on burning concrete and eyes closed for 4 minutes beforehand. He pressed down on the tailgate with both hands, felt the metal, hot from the sun, and let out a breath through his nose that was slow and controlled and completely insufficient to what was actually happening in his chest. Rains came up beside him. Didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the truck and looked at the mountains on the west side of the valley. "I've been at this for 19 years, Rains said. "I know," Cole said. "I've seen 4 men, Chow. 4. Who I'd put in a category by themselves. Where you stop comparing and just watch." He paused. "She's 5. Cole said nothing. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad," Rains said. "I'm telling you because I think you need to hear it from someone who isn't going to dress it up." Cole looked at him. "She had 2 shots. She had 2 shots and she used the first one as a sensor," Rains said. "Deliberately. She planned to miss with round 1. He shook his head. "That's not shooting. That's something else." "What is it?" Rains was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a word for it," he said, and he walked away. Mog. The formal debrief was supposed to begin at 1600 in the main briefing room, a long, low-ceilinged space with fluorescent lighting and folding tables arranged in a rectangle and a projector screen at one end that had seen better decades. Torres had moved the start time twice already. each time by 15 minutes, each time with the kind of vague logistical explanation that was really a placeholder for, "We're not ready yet," because we don't know what to say. By the time the shooters assembled at 16:30, the room had a particular tension to it. Not hostility, not exactly. More like the collective discomfort of a group of people who have all arrived at the same uncomfortable question simultaneously and are waiting to see who's going to say it out loud first. Elena sat at the far end of one of the tables. She'd changed into a clean utility shirt. Someone had brought her a water bottle and she was working through it steadily. Hale was beside her. He was the only person in the room who looked completely relaxed, which Cole found irritating in a way he recognized was irrational. Torres stood at the front with his data tablet and a look on his face that suggested he'd spent the last 40 minutes trying to turn what had happened into bureaucratic language and was not fully succeeding. "All right," Torres said, "let's get into the data." He pulled up the impact summary on the screen. 13 shooters. 39 rounds fired. 0 confirmed hits on the scoring plate. Then, below the summary line, a separate entry in different formatting. Shooter 14, Elena Voss, Commander, USN. 2 rounds, 1 confirmed center mass impact, scoring plate. The room looked at the screen. The atmospheric conditions during the evaluation window were consistent with our pre-range assessment, Torres said. Wind corridor showed significant variation, particularly in the zone between sensor positions 3 and 5, which we've identified as a likely heat channel inversion created by the Eastern Valley topography. This inversion was responsible for a significant portion of the wind correction errors across all shooting positions. He paused. He looked at his tablet. Commander Voss's approach to the problem differed from the other shooters in several observable ways. Rather than relying primarily on sensor data and ballistic computation, she took her shoes off, said a voice from the middle of the table. It was Del Rey, the senior chief who'd been the second shooter. He said it without heat, without mockery, just stated it like a fact he was still arranging into a shape that made sense. She took her shoes off and sat on the ground with her eyes closed. The room was quiet. Torres looked at Del Rey, then at Elena. "Commander Voss," Torres said, "would you be willing to speak to your methodology?" Elena put down the water bottle. She looked around the table once, a brief, taking inventory look, then at Torres. "Sure," she said. She didn't stand. She stayed seated, which in this context was its own kind of statement. Not a power move, not deliberate, just her natural mode of operation, which didn't include performing for a room. "The sensor data was accurate," she said. "It was also insufficient. Sensors measure at fixed points. The atmosphere moves between those points in ways the sensors can't capture. That gap, between what the data shows and what the air is actually doing, is where most of the misses were living." "Most of us knew that," Ochoa said from the other end of the table. His voice was careful. Not dismissive, but careful. "That's not new information." "No," Elena agreed. "The gap isn't new. What I did differently was use the ground." A beat. "The ground," Del Rey said. "Surface temperature differential along the valley floor creates microcurrents that are predictable if you can feel them. The concrete at the firing position, the hard pan out in the corridor, the rock formations to the east. Each of them is radiating heat at a different rate, and those rates create patterns in the air above them. Patterns that show up in how the mirage moves. Patterns that a sensor array doesn't capture, because sensors measure the air at 1 meter above grade, not at ground level where the currents originate." She paused, picked up the water bottle again, drank. "The barefoot contact gave me a reference. I could feel the heat differential coming off the concrete relative to the ambient. It told me something about what the surface was doing downrange, because the geology is consistent across the valley. I wasn't guessing. I was extrapolating from a data point the sensors didn't have." The room processed this. "That's—" Whitfield, the ranger sergeant, stopped. Started again. "I have a master's in physics. What you just described is—" He stopped again. "It's not impossible. Theoretically it's sound, but the precision required to—" He ran his hand over his face. "You'd have to have years of practice building that kind of environmental sensitivity." "Yes," Elena said simply. "Where?" Whitfield said. "Where do you practice that?" The question sat in the room. Elena looked at Hale. Hale looked at his folded hands on the table. Elena turned back to the table. That's a longer conversation, she said, and she picked up her water bottle, which everyone in the room understood as a signal that the longer conversation was not happening today. Cole left the debrief early. He told Torres he had a call at 1700, which was technically true and completely irrelevant. The call could have waited, and Torres probably knew it. But nobody stopped him, and he walked out of the briefing room into the late afternoon heat and kept walking until he was at the far end of the parking area, out of line of sight of the building's windows. He sat on a concrete barrier and stared at the mountains. The sun was getting low, throwing long shadows across the western faces. The temperature had dropped, not much, maybe 4 degrees. But after a full day in the triple digits, 4 degrees felt like a different world. The light had gone from white to gold, the kind of desert light that makes everything look significant whether it is or not. He was angry. He knew that. He was self-aware enough to know what was sitting in his chest and what it was called. The anger wasn't at her. Not exactly, not cleanly. It was more complicated than that. It was the anger of a man who has spent 20 years building something, a skill, a reputation, an understanding of what excellence means and what it looks like, and has just had a piece of that building demonstrated to him to be less solid than he believed. He had dismissed her. He had heard what she said about his shot, heard it, processed it, confirmed it, and then filed it away under unsolicited input from an unverified source and made his own adjustment in his own direction. And his own direction had been wrong, and her direction had been right. And in the arithmetic of what had happened today, those two facts sat beside each other like stones he was going to be carrying for a while. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Walsh. He declined the call. He'd talk to Walsh later. Later, when he'd finished whatever this was. The question Whitfield had asked was still sitting in his head. Where do you practice that? Where do you spend enough time in enough environments, reading enough conditions that you can press your bare feet to the ground and extract meaningful atmospheric data from the heat differential? Where does that kind of knowing get built? Combat, probably. The real kind, not the training kind. The kind where you can't trust instruments because instruments are heavy, and heavy things get left behind when you're moving fast, and where reading the environment wrong doesn't cost you a miss on a range. It costs you something you can't get back. Cole knew combat. He'd been in it, genuinely, the kind where people are shooting at you and the margins are measured in seconds and centimeters. But his combat had been CQB heavy, close quarters, buildings, rooms, short distances where the problem of ballistics barely had time to become a problem. His long-range work was precision work, controlled environment work, sensor-supported work. Elena's long-range work, apparently, had been something else. He sat on the concrete barrier until the light went fully gold, and then started toward orange, and then he got up and walked back toward the building, because there was a debrief he'd walked out of, and that wasn't something he made a habit of. The formal session had ended by the time he returned, but a smaller group had stayed, Hale, Walsh, Rains, and Whitfield, plus Elena, all of them around one corner of the rectangular table, with coffee that had been sitting since morning and was therefore exactly as terrible as Hale had promised. Cole came in. He sat down. Nobody made a comment about his absence. Hale was talking. He did that thing that good teachers do. Not lecturing, not performing, just talking the way people talk when they know something deeply and aren't trying to impress you with it. The military teaches precision shooting as a physics problem, Hale said, which it is. But it's not only that. The problem with treating it as only a physics problem is that physics assumes complete information. You never have complete information. You have sensor data and ballistic tables and atmospheric models, and all of those are approximations. They're good approximations. But the gap between the approximation and the reality is where a shot lives or dies. What fills the gap? Whitfield said. Observation, Hale said. Not instrument observation, direct observation. The kind you build with your body, not with equipment. He looked at his coffee cup. Most operators don't build that because they don't have to. The instruments are good enough for most applications. The problem is you develop a dependency. You start to think the sensor data is the ground truth instead of understanding that the sensor data is a model of the ground truth, and models have limits. So you train without instruments, Rains said. It wasn't a question. Sometimes, Hale said. He glanced at Elena. Sometimes you train in conditions where instruments fail, not because you've arranged for them to fail, because they do. Because you're in a place where the environment is hostile to electronics, or you're moving too fast to carry them, or something has gone wrong with your equipment at the wrong moment, and you adapt. Elena was looking at her coffee. She trained without instruments, Cole said. It came out of him before he'd fully decided to say it. He wasn't looking for validation or information. He'd already arrived at the conclusion, and the question was rhetorical in the way that some observations are when you need to hear them stated out loud to know whether they're real. Hale looked at him. For certain phases of her development, yes. Where? Various environments, Hale said, which was the non-answer version of that information is not for this room. Cole looked at Elena. She looked back at him. Not defensively, not provokingly, just the same direct quality she'd had since she'd arrived. Why? Cole said. Why what? She said. Why train that way? If instruments exist and they're good enough for most applications, why spend the time building something that most operators will never need? She thought about this for a moment. Not performing the thinking, actually thinking. Because most operators aren't solving this problem, she said. She tipped her head slightly toward the general direction of the range outside. Most long-range applications are within 2,000 meters, 2.5 at the outside in optimal conditions. Sensor arrays handle that well. But there's a category of application where the distance is past that threshold and the conditions are degraded and the instruments either aren't available or aren't reliable, and in that category, she paused. In that category, most of the conventional approaches fail. And you were trained for that category, Cole said. I was trained for that category, she said. By him. Cole looked at Hale. Hale didn't confirm or deny. He drank his terrible coffee. Cole sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent lights had one tube that was flickering slightly, a slow, irregular pulse that you only noticed when the room was quiet enough. All right, Cole said. Elena looked at him. I owe you an acknowledgement, Cole said. You told me about the inversion before my second shot. I adjusted wrong because I dismissed your input. That was my mistake, and it cost me the shot. I'm acknowledging that. The room was quiet. Okay, Elena said. That's it, Walsh said, which got him a look from Rains that shut him down immediately. That's it, Elena said. That's what an acknowledgement is. Cole nodded once. There was something almost procedural about the exchange. Not cold, but efficient. The acknowledgement made, received, and filed. Both of them the kind of people who didn't need ceremony around accountability, which in its own way was a point of genuine similarity between two people who had been operating in entirely separate understandings of each other all day. Hale pulled Cole aside after the others had gone. The room was empty by then except for the two of them, and the fluorescent light was still flickering, and the mountains outside the window had gone dark blue and then nearly black as the last of the desert sun pulled away. She's going to be assigned to the program, Hale said. His voice was different now. Still even, still measured, but with something underneath it that Cole recognized as the register Hale used when he was telling you something that mattered. What program? Cole said. The evaluation is the front end of a new curriculum. Extended range precision engagement under degraded atmospheric and instrumentation conditions. The board has been looking at it for 18 months. Today was the practical component of the feasibility assessment. Cole thought about this. She was the proof of concept. She was one of 4 candidates they evaluated over 6 months, Hale said. She's the one that made it through the full assessment. The others didn't hit the plate. The others didn't make it to the plate. Hale looked at him. The assessment wasn't only today. Today was the final demonstration. There were field evaluations before this. Night conditions, moving weather, degraded communication environments. The kind of conditions where you're working without support infrastructure. What happened to the other 3? Cole said. Hale was quiet for a moment. 2 withdrew voluntarily. The third was medically separated after an injury sustained during field evaluation. He didn't elaborate. Elena was the last one standing. Cole looked at him. You designed the curriculum. I contributed to it, Hale said. And you specifically requested she be the final demonstration today. Yes. Why today? Why in front of all of us? Hale looked at the window. The mountains were invisible now, just a dark mass against a slightly less dark sky. Because the curriculum needs operational buy-in, he said. It's one thing to build a training program and have it approved on paper. It's another to have 13 senior operators watch what the program produces and understand what they're looking at. He paused. The people in this room today, you, Rains, Ochoa, Walsh, your opinions carry weight. When you go back to your units and someone asks whether the program is worth the resources, your answer matters. Cole looked at him. You knew I'd dismiss her, Cole said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, and a precise one. Hale met his eyes. I knew there was a reasonable probability you'd treat her the same way most of the community treats anyone who arrives without an established record in a format they recognize. And you wanted me to watch myself do it. I wanted you to have the information you need, Hale said, to form an accurate opinion about what you saw today. Cole was quiet. The flickering fluorescent light pulsed twice and then steadied. It had been threatening to die all afternoon and had apparently decided to stay. She's going to teach it, Cole said. The curriculum. She'll be the primary instructor. There will be a small cohort, hand-picked, operators with the right cognitive profile, the right physical sensitivity, the right disposition toward environmental reading. Hale paused. We'll need people to help select the cohort, people with operational credibility and institutional relationships. Cole looked at him. That's why you wanted me here, Cole said. Hale didn't answer directly. He picked up his cap from the table and put it on. I wanted you here because you're one of the best long-range shooters this community has produced in the last decade, and I wanted you to see what the ceiling above you looks like. He walked to the door. Get some rest, he said. The drive back is long. And he left Cole standing alone in the flickering light. Cole didn't leave the facility until 1900. He spent the intervening time sitting in his truck in the parking lot, running back through the day in the way that he did after operations. Not the emotional processing, not yet, but the tactical review. Every decision point, every judgment call, every moment where he'd had information and had chosen how to weight it. He'd had her warning about the inversion before his second shot. He'd categorized it as unverified input from a lateral source without established credibility, which was a precise description of how it had felt in the moment, and a precise description of the thought process that had produced one of the worst decisions he'd made at a range in years. The categorization hadn't been wrong exactly. The process he'd applied to her input was the same process he applied to all lateral input. Weigh the source, weigh the data, compare to your own assessment, decide. The problem was in the weighting. He had weighted the source at near zero before he'd heard the data, because the source was a woman in utilities he didn't recognize with a designation he didn't know, and an approach to a firing position that involved removing her footwear. He'd decided before he'd listened. That was the thing that sat in him with its full weight now, alone in the truck as the desert dark settled in and the temperature finally, genuinely dropped. He hadn't made a bad calculation. He'd made a premature one. He'd calculated her value before the evidence was in, and then he'd held the calculation against the evidence instead of letting the evidence revise the calculation. He'd done it to her, and he'd done it to himself. Walsh knocked on the driver's window. Cole rolled it down. You're the last vehicle, Walsh said. I know. Walsh leaned against the door frame. He had that expression he got when he had something to say and was taking his time building toward it. Walsh was methodical that way. He'd been Cole's spotter for 4 years, and Cole had learned that the pace of Walsh's thinking was not the same as the speed of what was happening inside it. You gonna tell me what Hale said? Walsh said. He's building a curriculum. She's gonna run it. He wants buy-in from the operational community. Walsh took this in. And he wanted us here to watch the proof of concept. Yes. Walsh nodded slowly. He looked at the facility building, the lights still on inside, the low concrete profile of it against the sky. She was never going to fail today, he said. Was she? Probably not. But she could have. The inversion could have been wrong. The ground data could have been, she would have found another approach, Cole said. Or she would have asked for more rounds. She'd identified enough of the problem that she would have solved it one way or another. How do you know that? Cole looked at the steering wheel. Because she wasn't trying to hit the plate, he said. She was trying to understand the corridor. The hit was the result of understanding. If understanding the corridor had taken 4 rounds instead of 2, she would have needed 4 rounds. Walsh was quiet for a moment. That's different. Yes. That's not how we train. No, Cole said. It's not. Walsh straightened up from the door frame. He looked at the sky. Clear and enormous now, the desert dark doing what it did. turning the stars into something almost aggressive in their quantity. "You want to drive back together?" he said. "I'm going to sit here a while," Cole said. Walsh nodded. He patted the door once. "Don't sit too long. It's going to get cold." "It's Nevada," Cole said. "It'll get cold fast." "Exactly," Walsh said, and walked to his own vehicle. Cole watched him go. Then he looked at the dark mountains and the overbright stars and the empty parking lot and the low building where a fluorescent light was probably still flickering. Somewhere in the facility, he assumed Elena Voss was doing what she'd been doing all day. Whatever version of listening applied to the end of this particular evening. He didn't know her well enough to picture it. He knew her precisely 2 hours better than he had this morning, which was to say, well enough to understand that he didn't know her at all. What he did know was that he would be driving back to San Diego tomorrow with a set of questions he hadn't had when he arrived. Not about her, about himself. About the architecture of the assumptions he carried into a room and how solid those assumptions actually were, and what it cost when they were wrong. 6 inches. He could work with 6 inches. 6 inches was the margin between his best and the target, and the margin could be closed. That was the nature of precision work. You identified the gap, and you closed it, systematically, through adjustment and refinement. But the gap he was sitting with now wasn't measured in inches. It was measured in the distance between hearing something true and choosing whether to let it land. That gap, Cole thought, looking at the Nevada dark, was the one that was actually going to take work. He put the truck in drive and pulled toward the gate. The facility lights went small in his rearview mirror, and then the road turned and they disappeared entirely, and there was nothing around him but the scrub and the dark and the 40 minutes of nothing between Raven Ridge and the highway. He drove with the window down. The air was cold now, exactly as Walsh had said, with the specific clean sharpness of high desert after dark. It came through the window and hit his face and filled the cab with the smell of sage and mineral and the faint memory of heat that the land was still releasing from its stored-up day. He was halfway to the highway when his phone buzzed on the center console. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, a prefix he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. Same number. He picked up on the third buzz. "Cole," he said. A pause on the line. The connection quality was marginal. He was in a canyon between 2 ridgelines, and the signal was negotiating with the geology. "Captain Cole." The voice on the other end was not familiar, but it had a quality, measured, unhurried, with the particular timbre of institutional authority, that made Cole's hand tighten slightly on the phone. "This is Rear Admiral Svensson, SOCOM Assessment Division." Cole kept his eyes on the road. "Admiral," he said, "I understand you were at Raven Ridge today." "Yes, sir." "I'd like to hear your assessment," Svensson said, "of what you observed. Specifically, your assessment of Commander Voss's performance and your evaluation of the proposed curriculum's operational viability." Cole drove for a few seconds without answering. This was not a casual call. Rear admirals and SOCOM assessment divisions did not make casual calls to captains at 1900 on evaluation days. This was the beginning of something, a process, a deliberation, a decision chain that had been set in motion long before today, and of which today was only one data point. Hale had set this up. He understood that immediately. Not the call specifically, maybe not the call, but the position. He'd been placed in a position where his assessment would be sought, and his assessment would matter, and what he said about Elena Voss in the next 5 minutes would carry weight in a decision that would shape something going forward. "Admiral," Cole said, "with respect, I'd like to have that conversation in person." A pause. "Is there a reason for the preference?" Svensson said. "My assessment is going to require context," Cole said, "and context doesn't transmit well over a marginal canyon connection at 1900. Another pause. Longer. "Fair enough," Svensson said. "My office. Wednesday, 0900. "I'll be there," Cole said. The call ended. Cole set the phone back on the console. He drove the remaining distance to the highway in silence, and when he reached the 2-lane and the tires changed their tone on the cleaner asphalt, he let out a slow breath. Wednesday. He had until Wednesday to figure out what he was going to say, about Elena, about the range, about his own performance, and about the particular gap between what he'd believed this morning and what he knew now. It wasn't a lot of time. It was enough. He turned onto the highway and drove south into the dark, with the cold desert air still coming through the open window, carrying with it the last of the heat that the ground had spent all day storing up. Wednesday arrived the way difficult things tend to arrive, sooner than Cole was ready and exactly on schedule. He'd spent the intervening 2 days doing what he always did when something was sitting unresolved in him, working. PT at OH 500 both mornings, then range time at the base facility, then administrative work on his desk that had been accumulating for 3 weeks. He went through the motions of all of it with his full physical presence and about 60% of his mental attention, the remaining 40 occupied by the question of what he was going to say to Rear Admiral Svensson and whether the two things, what he should say and what he wanted to say, were the same thing or different ones. He arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at OH 840. The SOCOM Assessment Division occupied a building on the south end of the installation that didn't announce itself. No large sign, no distinctive architecture, just a 2-story concrete structure with narrow windows and an access control point that took his credentials and held them long enough that Cole wondered briefly if someone had pulled his clearance in the last 48 hours. They hadn't. The credentials came back with a badge, and he was walked by a young petty officer through 2 security doors and into a conference room on the second floor that smelled like new carpet and institutional coffee. Svensson was already there. Rear Admiral David Svensson was 60 years old, and he looked it in the way that Navy officers who have spent the better part of 3 decades in the water tend to look it, weathered, not aged. I was lean and tall with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of stillness that senior officers develop when they've been in enough rooms where the wrong energy causes problems. He was in service dress. Cole was in his own service dress, which had felt like the right call on the drive over. 2 other people were in the room. A civilian, woman, early 50s, reading glasses on a lanyard, a laptop open in front of her, and a Marine colonel whose name tag read Dryden, and who had the expression of a man attending a meeting he didn't originate and wasn't entirely sure he needed to be at. "Captain Cole," Svensson said. He didn't stand but gestured at the chair across from him. "Sit." Cole sat. "You know why you're here," Svensson said. Not a question. "You want my assessment of Monday's evaluation," Cole said. "Specifically, Commander Voss." "Specifically the curriculum," Svensson said. "Voss is already assessed. She passed every metric we put in front of her across 6 months of evaluation. What she did Monday was the closing demonstration for a board that had already made its recommendation. What I need from you is something different." Cole waited. "The curriculum requires a co-instructor," Svensson said. "Someone with operational SEAL sniper credibility. Someone the community will listen to when the program asks them to do things that don't fit conventional training doctrine." He set his hands flat on the table. "I want your name attached to it." Cole kept his face even. "With respect, Admiral," he said, "you're asking me based on a 4-hour evaluation window in which I failed to hit the target. I'm asking you based on a 20-year record and what Victor Hale told me about how you spent the last 2 hours of that evaluation window," Svensson said, "which apparently involved building a drift model from 13 shooters' impact data and arriving at a correct analysis of the atmospheric problem, after the fact, without instruments, using observational data." Cole said nothing. "You missed the plate," Svensson said. "You also independently replicated the analytical approach that Voss used, without training in it, and without knowing that's what you were doing. That's not a failure, Captain. That's a profile." Dryden, the Marine colonel, shifted in his seat. He hadn't said anything yet. He did now. "I want to be direct," Dryden said, and he had the voice to match, flat, Georgia-inflected, the kind of voice that had given a lot of orders in rooms with bad acoustics. "This program is not universally supported. There are people in this building who think it's a resource allocation problem. There are people in the community who are going to look at the instructor lineup and have questions." "About her," Cole said. "About the program's credibility," Dryden said. "About her," Cole said. "About the program's credibility," Dryden said, "which at the moment is substantially tied to a demonstration that not everyone saw." 39 people saw it, Cole said, 13 of whom had just spent a full day getting their confidence reduced by an extremely difficult range evolution, Dryden said. "The psychological conditions for skepticism are present. This community has a long institutional memory, and it has a very specific idea of what authority looks like. Commander Voss doesn't match that idea, and there are people who are going to use that mismatch to undermine the program before it gets started. Cole looked at him. Are you asking me to be a human shield? Dryden's expression didn't change. I'm asking you to be a co-instructor. What that does for the program's institutional positioning is a secondary benefit. A secondary benefit you considered before you put me on the list, Cole said. Dryden looked at Svensson. Svensson looked at Cole. Yes, Svensson said. Cole respected the directness of that more than he would have respected a softer version. I need to talk to Voss before I give you an answer, Cole said. Svensson nodded once. She's in the building, room 214. He paused. She's expecting you. Cole looked at him. Victor Hale's idea, Svensson said. Not mine. Room 214 was a small office, barely larger than a storage closet with pretensions, that had been assigned to Elena for her tenure at Coronado. It had a desk, 2 chairs, a narrow window looking at the concrete wall of the adjacent building, and a whiteboard covered in what appeared to be atmospheric diagrams. Not the clean, geometric kind from textbooks. Dense, layered, annotated in a handwriting that ran at a slight upward angle and used abbreviations that Cole didn't entirely recognize. Elena was at the desk when he knocked. She was writing something. She finished the sentence before she looked up. Close the door, she said. He closed it and took the second chair without being invited, which felt right. She set down her pen. She looked at him with the same direct quality she'd had in the desert. No performance, no calibration for the room, just whatever was actually in her eyes, which today looked less like the flat observation of Monday and more like a woman who had been in meetings for 2 days and was running on the wrong kind of tired. He offered you the co-instructor position, she said. Yes. And you want to know if I requested it, she said. Did you? No, she said. Hale suggested it. I didn't object. Why not? She looked at him for a moment. Because you're good, she said. You're genuinely good. You had the analytical framework right by the end of Monday. You got there without training and without being told what you were looking for. She paused. The cohort is going to need to see the method work for people who aren't me, people who have conventional SEAL sniper backgrounds and are being asked to add a layer to what they already know. You're a better proof of that than I am. You want me for the same reason Dryden does, Cole said. Credibility. I want you because I think you can actually do the work, she said. The credibility is Dryden's problem. Cole looked at the whiteboard, the atmospheric diagrams. What is that, he said. Curriculum Module 2, she said. Environmental reading under moving weather. Desert is the baseline. I'm building out the ocean surface component, the mountain canyon component, the urban heat island component. She paused. The same principles apply across environments. The specific expressions are different. How long have you been developing this? The theoretical framework? About 4 years. She reached for her coffee cup and discovered it was empty and set it back down with a slight expression of dissatisfaction. The practical component, the one that actually works, about 18 months. Hale said you spent time analyzing misses, Cole said. 240 engagements. She looked at him. He told you that? Yes. That was a longer conversation than I thought he'd have, she said. Not accusatory, just noting. He wanted me to understand the context, Cole said. She was quiet for a moment. The narrow window behind her showed a strip of blue sky above the concrete wall, and in it, a seagull was crossing in the particular diagonal that seagulls favor, moving fast on the coastal wind. 243, she said. Misses. Documented misses from long-range engagements across 3 theaters over a 7-year period. The data existed. Ballistics reports, AAR documentation, atmospheric logs where they were captured. Most of it had never been compiled into a usable form because nobody was looking for what I was looking for. Which was the pattern in this gap, she said, between what the environmental data predicted and what the bullet actually did. The gap is where the atmosphere is doing something that the instruments didn't capture. Compile enough gap data from enough different environments and the patterns start to emerge. There are only so many ways atmosphere can behave. It looks chaotic, but it has structure. Once you know the structure, you can read it without instruments, Cole said. Not perfectly, not infallibly. She was firm about that. I missed round 1 Monday. Deliberately, But the deliberate miss was also an acknowledgement that I didn't have complete information. I needed to see what the bullet did to know what the air was doing in the zone the sensors weren't covering. You built your own sensor, Cole said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not softened, but became slightly more specific, the way an expression becomes when someone has said something that's precisely right, and the person wasn't expecting precision from that particular direction. Yes, she said. That's exactly what round one was. They sat with that for a moment. If I agree to this, Cole said, I need to be more than institutional cover. I'm not putting my name on something I'm a figurehead for. I know, she said. I need to be able to teach the material, which means I need to learn it first, which means I need access to whatever you built. The atmospheric framework, the curriculum, the data behind it. You'll have it. And I need to be able to push back on the curriculum content when I think something doesn't transfer correctly to conventional SEAL training backgrounds. Not override you. Push back. Have an actual argument where both positions are represented. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to hold you to that, she said, including the arguments. Good, Cole said. She picked up the empty coffee cup again, apparently out of habit, and set it down again. There's something else, she said. What? The opposition to the program isn't just institutional skepticism, she said. There's a specific source, a senior officer in the sniper training community who has been working against the curriculum allocation for 8 months. He has relationships with 3 members of the appropriations working group, and he's been characterizing the program as, she paused, choosing the word with visible precision, unvalidated. Who? Cole said. She told him the name. Cole went still. The name she said was not a name he expected. It was the name of a man he knew well, had trained under, had a professional relationship with that was not friendly exactly, but was deeply rooted in mutual history and shared institutional standing. A man who, if he was working against this program, had the specific relationships and the specific credibility to do real damage. How long have you known? Cole said. About him specifically? 3 weeks. About the opposition in general. Since the program was first submitted for review. She looked at him. I wasn't going to tell you until after you agreed because I didn't want you to agree or decline based on that particular complication. But you told me now. Because you asked for honesty about what you were signing on to, she said, and that's part of it. Cole stood up. He walked to the whiteboard and looked at the atmospheric diagrams for a moment without really seeing them. His mind was running the complication through its implications, the relationships involved, the institutional lines, the particular difficulty of being positioned between someone he knew and someone he was deciding whether to back. He's going to come after the program harder when he sees my name on it, Cole said. Probably, Elena said, because he'll see it as a betrayal. Or as a threat, she said. Those aren't always the same thing. Cole turned back from the whiteboard. I'm in, he said. Elena looked at him. Just like that? You told me the hard part honestly, he said. That means something. He moved toward the door. Get me the curriculum materials by Friday. I want a week with them before we have any formal meetings with the board. Done, she said. He opened the door. Cole, she said. He turned. You had the inversion right, she said. Monday, before your second shot. Your direction was correct. You doubted yourself because you doubted the source. He looked at her. I know, he said, and he left. The next 4 weeks were the most intellectually uncomfortable of Cole's professional life. Not physically. Physically, the training involved was nothing outside his experience. The discomfort was entirely cognitive, the specific discomfort of a person who has achieved a high level of mastery in a domain discovering that the domain has an additional floor beneath the one they'd been standing on. It was like being an expert swimmer who discovers, late, that they've only been working in the first 6 feet of water, and the real swimming happens much deeper, and the pressure changes everything. Elena ran the pre-curriculum sessions in a converted classroom space at Coronado, just the 2 of them, before the cohort was selected and before the formal program began. She did not lecture. She would not lecture. She was firm about that in a way that Cole initially found frustrating and eventually understood. She presented problems and let him work through them. She showed him data sets, atmospheric logs, impact records, the 243 engagements. and asked him questions about what he observed. What do you see in the drift pattern between shots 7 and 14 in this engagement? What does the flag behavior at marker 4 tell you about what's happening at marker 6? If the mirage near the target is moving opposite to the sensor data, where is the inversion and how large is it? He was wrong, frequently. More frequently than he was comfortable with. He was wrong in ways that were instructive, not random misses but pattern misses, places where his existing framework made a confident prediction that the data contradicted, and each contradiction was a lesson about the architecture of an assumption he hadn't known he was carrying. Elena was a methodical teacher. Not warm. Warmth wasn't her primary register, but patient in the specific way of someone who is patient because they understand exactly how long learning takes, not because they've put on patience as a professional courtesy. She corrected him without cushioning the correction, which he appreciated. She also acknowledged when he was right, which happened with increasing frequency as the weeks moved forward. The thing about her, Cole was discovering, was that she was almost aggressively unsentimental about the work. She had no investment in her own elegance as a teacher or in Cole's elegance as a student. She had an investment in one thing only, whether the concept was transferring correctly. If it wasn't, she would find 4 different ways to present it until one of them worked. If it was, she moved on without ceremony. It was efficient and occasionally maddening and more effective than anything Cole had experienced in a training environment in 15 years. 3 weeks in, during a late session that had run past 2000 because they'd both been too interested in the problem to stop, Walsh came to find Cole in the classroom. Cole heard him before he saw him. Footsteps in the corridor, then a knock at the doorframe. Walsh came in looking like a man carrying something. "Captain," he said. He glanced at Elena. "Commander." He looked back at Cole. "I need a minute." Cole stepped out. Walsh pulled the door mostly shut behind them. The corridor was empty, just fluorescent light and the distant sound of the base operating in its nighttime mode, quieter but never fully quiet. "Halford called me," Walsh said. Cole went still. Commander Lawrence Halford was the name Elena had told him, the name he hadn't expected. Walsh saying it now with that particular weight meant the situation had moved. "What did he want?" Cole said. "He wanted to know how committed you were," Walsh said. His words. "He asked me, specifically asked me, whether you understood what you were putting your name on, whether you'd fully assessed the program's validity or whether Hale had worked on you. He called you directly." "My personal cell," Walsh said. "Not through channels." Cole looked at the door. Behind it, Elena was probably back at the atmospheric diagrams, continuing the session without him. "What did you tell him?" Cole said. "I told him I wasn't in a position to speak for your commitments," Walsh said. "And then I called you." He paused. "Mason, Halford trained both of us. He has a particular opinion about this program that I think you should hear before you hear it from someone else." "I know his opinion," Cole said. "Do you know why he has it?" Cole looked at him. Walsh ran his hand over the back of his head. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way of a man caught between loyalties that are both real. 4 years ago, Walsh said, there was a proposal for an extended-range curriculum. Different from this one, different approach, different methodology. Halford was the primary developer. He spent 14 months building it. The proposal was rejected by the board on resource allocation grounds. He paused. 3 of the board members who rejected it are on the current review board for this program. Cole was quiet. "He didn't oppose this program because he disagrees with it," Walsh said. "He opposed it because it got funding his didn't." "That's not better," Cole said. "No," Walsh said. "It's not better, but it's different from what you might be thinking." Cole looked at the corridor wall. There was a framed photo of a SEAL team, older photo, early generation equipment, that had been hanging there long enough that the frame was slightly yellowed. "Is he going to become a problem?" Cole said. "Or is he already one?" Walsh looked at him steadily. "I think," Walsh said carefully, "that the conversation he had with me tonight means he's already decided. He's building something. I don't know exactly what." "Find out," Cole said. "How?" "You have relationships I don't," Cole said. "Use them. Don't commit anything. Don't represent anything. Just listen." He looked at Walsh. "I need to know what he has and who he's talking to before it reaches the board." Walsh nodded slowly. He started back down the corridor. "Garrett," Cole said. Walsh stopped. Halford trained us. He was a good instructor and probably a better officer. Whatever he's doing, try to understand it before you decide what it means." Walsh was quiet for a moment. "You're more generous than I'd be," he said. "I'm not generous," Cole said. "I just know what it looks like when someone's operating from a wound rather than a conviction. I've done it myself." Walsh left. Cole stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he pushed the door open and went back into the classroom. Elena was at the whiteboard. She'd added 3 new diagrams while he was gone: mountain canyon formations and the cold air drainage patterns that created predictable inversions in high-altitude engagements. She didn't look up when he came in. "Problem?" she said. "Possibly," he said. He sat back down. "Tell me about the mountain canyon module. What's the primary difference from the desert application?" She turned from the whiteboard. She looked at him for a moment, a steady, reading look, and then she turned back to the diagram. "Cold air drainage," she said. "In the desert, the primary driver is surface heat differential. The ground is hotter than the air and the currents move upward. In mountain terrain, after dark or in the early morning, you get cold air pooling in canyon bottoms and draining toward lower elevations. That drainage creates a predictable pressure differential that affects bullet flight in the opposite direction from what desert-trained shooters expect." "Opposite," Cole said. "The Mirage runs differently. The flags behave differently. Everything you've learned in the desert about reading direction from visual cues has to be reversed." She paused. "It's the most common failure point for shooters who have desert experience and transition to mountain applications. They see the visual cues and apply the wrong correction because they're using a pattern from a different environment." "Confident wrong," Cole said. "The most dangerous kind," she said, "because you're not guessing. You're applying genuine knowledge to the wrong context." Cole thought about Halford, about 14 months of work, about a rejected proposal and 3 board members who were now reviewing a different curriculum with different instrumentation. "I know something about confident wrong," he said. Elena looked at him. "I'm not talking about the range," he said. She waited. "There's a complication with the program," he said. "I got more information tonight. I need to brief you on it, and then we need to decide together how to handle it. Not through Svensson. Not yet." She set down the marker she'd been holding. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. Walsh's call, Halford's history with the prior curriculum, the board members, the wound versus conviction distinction, and what he'd asked Walsh to find out. He delivered it the way he'd deliver a situation report, factual, sequential, without editorializing beyond what was necessary for her to understand the operational picture. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's going to challenge the atmospheric methodology," she said. "That's where he'll go. He'll frame it as unvalidated because the validation data comes from my analysis, not from an independent research body. He'll argue the sample set is too small or the methodology is self-referential." "Is it?" Cole said. She looked at him flatly. "Is it self-referential?" Cole said. "Or is the criticism valid?" She held his eyes. "The atmospheric methodology is grounded in documented ballistics data from real engagements. The analysis framework I applied is consistent with established meteorological principles. The gap between documented shot outcome and predicted outcome that I used as my primary data sources, it's real data. It's not modeled. It's not simulated." She paused. "But I'm the one who compiled it, and I'm the one who built the analysis framework. So yes, in the strictest academic sense, there's a self-referential component." "Could that be addressed," Cole said, "by an independent review?" "Yes," she said. "With time." "How much time?" 6 weeks minimum. Probably 10. Cole thought. "The cohort selection is scheduled to begin in 3 weeks." "I know. If Halford moves before the independent review is complete, he can use the gap," she said, "challenge the credibility of the methodology before it's been independently validated and request a delay pending review. The board has grounds to grant it. And a delay of 10 weeks probably kills the program," she said. 3 of the board members are rotating out in 8 months. Their replacements haven't been identified. The appropriations window for this fiscal year closes in 6 months. If the program doesn't have a validated cohort by then, the funding gets reallocated. She picked up the marker again. She turned back to the whiteboard, not because she was dismissing the conversation, but because she'd processed it and was moving to what came next. "We need to move faster." "The independent review," Cole said. "I know someone," she said. a research group at Sandia National Laboratories that has been building atmospheric modeling tools for defense applications. They've published on long-range ballistics and atmospheric interference. If they review the data set and the methodology, independent academic review, Cole said. From Sandia. Yes. Can you get them the data by Monday? She turned from the whiteboard. Her expression said, I had it packaged 3 weeks ago. Yes, she said. Do it, Cole said. She nodded. Cole looked at the mountain canyon diagrams on the whiteboard. Cold air drainage, predictable patterns moving in the opposite direction from what desert-trained shooters expected. The confidence of someone applying real knowledge to the wrong context. What else do I need to know tonight? He said. The canyon component has a secondary complication, she said. She turned back to the board. Rock face temperature differential. When the sun hits a canyon wall directly, it creates a localized updraft on the heated face. The updraft interacts with the cold air drainage and creates a turbulent zone that standard ballistic models don't account for. Where in the trajectory? Depends on canyon geometry, typically in the middle third of the shot. The bullet enters the turbulent zone already past the point where small corrections are effective. So you have to account for it before the shot, Cole said. You have to read the canyon face, she said. Color differential. Heated rock turns slightly lighter as the surface desiccates. Shadow line migration. You can watch the shadow move across the face and estimate the temperature rate differential from the rate of change. And there's a visual shimmer at the boundary of the updraft that's distinct from standard desert mirage. Cole leaned forward. Show me, he said. She turned back to the whiteboard. They worked for another hour and 40 minutes. By the time Cole left the building, it was past 2200, and the Coronado base had gone to its late-night operations tempo. Minimal vehicle traffic, distant security checkpoint activity, the sound of the ocean, a constant low-frequency presence beneath everything else. He walked to his vehicle in the dark. The cold air drainage phenomenon that Elena had described, cold air pooling and moving predictably toward lower elevation, was happening right now on every mountain range in the western United States, including the mountains east of the Nevada basin where Raven Ridge sat. The atmosphere was doing what it always did, following structure, following pattern, following physics, behaving with a consistency that looked like chaos until you'd spent enough time looking at it from the right angle. He sat in his truck. Walsh had texted during the session. Short message. 4 words. He's already talking. Careful. Cole stared at it. Then he put the truck in drive and went home. The call came at 06:12 the following morning. Cole was already up. He'd been up since 05, which was his normal rhythm, the biological early warning system of a man who'd spent 20 years in a job that occasionally required functional consciousness at very short notice. He was on his second coffee, standing at the kitchen window looking at the gray pre-dawn light coming off the water, when the phone buzzed. Svensson. He picked up. There's been a development, Svensson said without preamble. His voice had the quality of a man who'd been awake for a while already. Not tired, but operating in the particular alertness of someone who's received information and is already moving through its implications. Halford submitted a formal challenge to the curriculum methodology yesterday evening, went directly to the appropriations working group, bypassing my office. Cole set his coffee down. The challenge cites insufficient independent validation of the atmospheric analysis framework, Svensson continued. He's requesting a 90-day hold on cohort selection pending external academic review. 90 days? Not 60. Not 30. 90. Past the board rotation. Past the funding window. Has the working group responded? Cole said. Informally, Svensson said. 2 of the 3 members are sympathetic to the challenge. The third is neutral. A pause. I need to know if you have anything that addresses the validation gap. Yes, Cole said. A brief silence. How soon? Svensson said. I need 72 hours, Cole said. Maybe less. Another pause, shorter. The working group has a scheduled session Thursday morning. If I can put something in front of them before that session, I'll have it to you by Wednesday noon, Cole said. What is it? Svensson said. Cole looked at the gray light on the water. The marine layer was sitting low over the bay, the kind of coastal fog that would burn off by 0900, predictable in its behavior because it followed patterns that anyone who'd lived near the ocean long enough could read without instruments. Independent academic validation, Cole said, from Sandia National Laboratories. Another silence, longer this time. You already initiated a review, Svensson said. We anticipated the challenge, Cole said. When? Svensson said. Last night, Cole said. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was the silence of a flag officer recalibrating something. I see, Svensson said. Cole waited. Wednesday noon, Captain, Svensson said. And the line closed. Cole stood at the kitchen window. The marine layer was sitting exactly where it should be, moving the way cold air behaved near a temperature differential, exactly as predictable as physics said it should be once you understood what you were looking at. He picked up his phone and called Elena. She answered on the second ring. Halford moved last night, Cole said. 90-day hold request. We need Sandia's preliminary findings by Wednesday noon. A pause. Brief. The kind that meant she was thinking, not surprised. I'll call them at 0700, she said. Elena. He almost never used her first name. Will they have enough to give us something real in 72 hours? They have the data set, she said. They've had it since Sunday. I may have suggested the possibility of an accelerated timeline. Cole was quiet for a moment. You knew he was going to move, Cole said. I knew someone was going to move, she said. This program has never made it easy on itself. I tried to plan for the obvious attacks. Cole looked at the marine layer, at the predictable movement of cold air against warm, the way the boundary between them produced exactly the phenomena that atmospheric physics said it would. You built your own sensor again, Cole said. She didn't answer immediately. Call me when you have Sandia's timeline confirmed, he said, and ended the call. He finished his coffee standing at the window, watching the marine layer move in the way cold air always moved when it met something warmer, not randomly, not chaotically, but with the quiet, unstoppable logic of everything that follows its own nature all the way to the end. Sandia called Elena back at 0823. She was in the classroom at Coronado when her phone rang. Not the office, the classroom, because she'd been there since 0630 working through the Mountain Canyon module materials and hadn't seen a reason to move. Cole wasn't scheduled until 0900, but she'd texted him the moment she hung up with Sandia, and he was through the door by 0840, still in the clothes he'd worn at the kitchen window 2 hours earlier, coffee in one hand, and the expression of a man who'd driven faster than the speed limit to get here. What did they say? He said. Preliminary findings by Tuesday evening, she said. Full written review by Wednesday 0900. She paused. They've been in the data since Sunday. Dr. Reyes, she's the lead on their atmospheric modeling group. She told me they identified the inversion pattern in the first 12 hours, called it consistent with documented microthermal behavior in high desert basin topography. That's useful language, Cole said. That's exactly the language we need in front of the working group, she said. Independent research institution confirming the atmospheric phenomena are real and consistent with established science. It doesn't validate the full curriculum, but it validates the foundation. Cole sat down. He processed this for a moment, the way he processed range data, not rushing it, letting the implications arrange themselves in order. Halford's challenge is that the methodology is self-referential, he said. Sandia confirming the atmospheric science removes the primary leg of that argument. It doesn't remove all of it, Elena said. He can still challenge the training application, whether teaching operators to read environmental data without instruments is viable at scale, whether the skill transfers reliably across different body types, cognitive profiles, sensory sensitivities. Can he make that argument with evidence, Cole said. He has 14 months of development work on his prior curriculum, she said. He knows how training programs get evaluated. He'll know which questions to ask. Cole looked at her. What's in his curriculum that isn't in yours? She was quiet for a moment. His approach used a sensor augmentation model, she said. Miniaturized instruments that could be field carried, giving operators better data rather than teaching them to extract data from the environment. She set her pen down on the table. It's not a bad approach. It solves a real problem. But it got rejected. On cost grounds. The sensor package was expensive to produce and maintain, and the board at the time decided the cost-to-benefit ratio didn't support it. She paused. He spent 14 months building something technically sound that got killed by a budget line. Cole watched her face. There was something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Not sympathy exactly, but a precise, unglamorous acknowledgement of something true. "You don't think he's entirely wrong," Cole said. "I think he built a valid approach to a real problem and had it taken away for reasons that had nothing to do with its validity," she said, "and then watched a different approach to the same problem move forward. And I think that's genuinely frustrating, and the frustration is legitimate, and the way he's handling it is wrong." She picked the pen back up. "Both things are true." "Does that change how we handle Wednesday?" Cole said. She thought about this. "It might change how you handle it," she said. "If there's a conversation to be had with Halford directly, not through the board, not through the challenge process. You want me to talk to him," Cole said. "I'm saying it's a possibility," she said. "I can't do it. He's not going to hear it from me." "He might not hear it from me either," Cole said. "He thinks I was worked by Hale." "Were you?" she said. Cole looked at her. "Were you worked by Hale?" she repeated. Not provocative, just asking the question. Cole thought about the drive back from Raven Ridge, the concrete barrier and the mountains going dark, and the phone call from Svensson and Walsh's careful voice outside the briefing room door. He thought about 6 inches and what it had cost him to close the distance between what he'd believed and what was true. "No," he said. "I was shown something real, and I decided to trust it." He paused. "Hale created the conditions. The decision was mine." She nodded once. "Talk to Halford," she said, "before Wednesday. Not to change his mind, just so he hears it directly." Halford agreed to meet, which surprised Cole slightly. He'd expected resistance, a delay, a scheduled conflict, the polite bureaucratic friction of a man who doesn't want a conversation but can't refuse it without the refusal itself becoming information. Instead, Halford texted back within 20 minutes. "O'Brien's, 1800. Don't bring Walsh." O'Brien's was a bar 2 miles off base that had been serving military personnel for 30-something years in the particular no-frills way of places that understand their clientele. Good beer, bad lighting, booths with enough acoustic separation that 2 people could talk without performing for the room. Cole arrived at 1750 and found Halford already at a corner booth with a beer he'd barely touched. Commander Lawrence Halford was 54. He'd spent 26 years in naval special warfare, the last 8 in sniper instruction and curriculum development. He was heavy in the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been weathered by years of outdoor operational work into something that looked simultaneously older and more capable than his age suggested. He'd been Cole's primary instructor during advanced sniper qualification. That was 12 years ago. The relationship since had been professional, respectful, not warm, the kind that develops between people who have learned something important from each other and then moved into parallel orbits that rarely intersected. Cole sat down across from him. The bartender came. Cole ordered a beer he didn't particularly want because not ordering felt like a statement. Halford looked at him without particular hostility. That was the first thing Cole registered, the absence of hostility. What was there instead was something more complicated and harder to read. "You're going to tell me I'm handling this wrong," Halford said. "I'm going to tell you what I know," Cole said. "What you do with it is yours." Halford picked up his beer, looked at it, set it down. "Hale recruited you," he said. "Hale put me in a room and showed me something," Cole said. "I recruited myself." A beat. "She hit the plate," Halford said. "Dead center, 2nd round." "I heard." "You weren't there," Cole said. "No," Halford said. "I wasn't." He said it flatly, without elaboration, but the flatness itself was full of something. Cole let it sit for a moment. "Tell me about your program," Cole said. Halford looked at him. "I'm not asking to evaluate it," Cole said. "I'm asking because I want to understand what you built." Halford was quiet for a moment. He turned his beer glass a quarter rotation on the table. It was a small, involuntary gesture of a man deciding whether to open something. "Sensor package," Halford said. "Compact. Field deployable. About the size of a deck of cards. Micro anemometer. Surface thermistor. Barometric cell." Feeds real-time atmospheric data to a modified ballistic calculator via short-range encrypted link. He paused. At 2,000 meters, it increases first-round hit probability by 31% in degraded conditions. At 3,000, the gain is larger because the atmospheric air compounds. What did it cost? Cole said. Per unit, about $4,000 in prototype. Scaled to production, projected at 1,800. He looked at Cole. The board said the program infrastructure cost, training, sustainment, replacement cycle, put the total above threshold for the appropriations window. By how much? Halford's jaw moved. 12%. Cole looked at him. 12% over threshold. Yes. The bartender came with Cole's beer. Neither of them spoke while she set it down and moved away. I'm not going to tell you that's fair, Cole said. I know, Halford said. I'm also not going to tell you that what you're doing now is the right response to it, Cole said. Halford looked at his beer. Her methodology hasn't been independently validated. It will be, Cole said. By Wednesday morning, Sandia National Laboratories, Dr. Reyes's atmospheric modeling group. They've been in the data since Sunday. Halford went still. They're confirming the atmospheric science, Cole said. The microthermal inversion patterns, the surface heat differential currents, the mirage behavior at distance, consistent with established meteorological principles. He paused. The foundation of the methodology is real. You know it's real. You've been in enough degraded condition environments to have felt exactly what she's describing, even if you've never had the framework to name it. Halford didn't answer. Your program solved the data gap with better instruments, Cole said. Her program solves it with better perception. They're not competing solutions. They're different approaches to the same gap. Cole picked up his beer. The reason they're in competition is because there's only one appropriations window and one board, not because the approaches are mutually exclusive. Halford looked at him for a long time. She's going to teach a cohort of operators to take their boots off and press their feet to the ground, Halford said. And you're going to stand next to her with a straight face. I'm going to teach operators to read atmospheric conditions through environmental contact and direct observation, Cole said. And yes, straight face. Because she hit the plate. Because she hit the plate, and I understand why, Cole said. And I've spent 3 weeks learning enough of the framework to know it's not luck and it's not performance. It's a skill, a trainable skill, built from real science. Halford looked away. He looked at the bar, the other patrons, the television mounted in the corner showing something nobody was watching, the bartender moving in the efficient loop of someone who's worked the same space long enough to stop thinking about it. My program would have worked, he said. I believe you, Cole said. Halford looked back at him. Something in his face had shifted, not resolved, not softened, but slightly rearranged. The particular rearrangement of a man who has been holding something at a fighting distance for long enough that his arms are tired. What do you want from me? Halford said. I want you to pull the challenge, Cole said. Before Wednesday. The Sandia review will be in front of the working group regardless. That's happening whether you pull it or not. But if the challenge is still active when the review lands, it looks like you pushed for a validation that your own challenge triggered and the validation found against your position. That's a worse outcome for you than pulling it now and letting the program move forward on its own merits. Halford looked at him. You're protecting me, he said. I'm giving you a cleaner exit, Cole said. It's not the same thing. A long silence. I don't like this program, Halford said. I know, Cole said. You don't have to like it. You have to decide what it costs you to keep fighting it. Halford picked up his beer and finished it. He set the glass down and looked at it for a moment, then looked at Cole. I'll have to think about it, he said. You have until Tuesday morning, Cole said. After that, the Sandia findings are in Svensson's hands, and the conversation changes. He stood, left money on the table for both drinks, walked to the door. Behind him, Halford said nothing. But he didn't leave either, and Cole could feel him sitting in that booth still holding the weight of 14 months and a 12% budget overrun. And Cole didn't have anything for that except the knowledge that some things take time to set down, and pressing someone to set them down faster than they can doesn't work. He drove back to base. Halford pulled the challenge at 0940 Tuesday morning. The notification came through Svensson's office to Torres, who forwarded it to Cole's email with a single line of text, challenge withdrawn. Thursday working group session proceeds on original agenda. Cole forwarded it to Elena without comment. She responded 40 minutes later. Sandia findings are in. Reyes confirmed full preliminary validation, sending to Svensson now. Wednesday morning arrived with its own weather. Coastal overcast, marine layer sitting at about 800 feet, the kind of gray San Diego morning that burned off into clarity by 10, but started out looking like the sky had given up. Cole was in the building at 08:15. He passed Elena in the corridor outside the classroom. She was carrying a folder and a coffee and moving at the pace of someone who'd been up since 5. Svensson has the Sandia report, she said without stopping. Good, he said, matching her pace. He called me at 0700, she said. He wants a joint briefing, you, me, him, before the working group session. When? 0900. She glanced at him. You have 45 minutes. I know what I'm going to say, he said. She looked at him briefly, a reading look, checking whether that was confidence or performance. She apparently decided it was the former because she nodded and turned toward the office. Elena, he said. She stopped. Halford's program, he said. The sensor package. Is there a version of the curriculum that incorporates it as a supplemental tool? Not the primary methodology. Supplemental. For operators who want to cross-train both approaches. She turned fully to look at him. That would require additional funding, she said. I know, he said. Is it technically compatible? She thought about it. He could see her thinking, not performing consideration, but actually working through the integration problem. Yes, she said. The sensor data would function as a confirmation layer. An operator reads the environment through direct observation, then cross-checks against the sensor package where available. It would actually strengthen the training, give operators a way to calibrate their perceptual reads against measured data during the learning phase. And in the field, when the sensors aren't available, the perceptual skill is already built, she said. The sensors are a training aid, not a dependency. Cole looked at her. Write that up, he said. 1 page. Before 0900. She looked at him for a moment. You're going to propose integrating Halford's sensor package into the curriculum, she said. I'm going to propose that the working group consider whether the two approaches might be stronger together than either is alone, Cole said. Which is true, and which also happens to address the institutional wound that's been causing us problems. She was quiet. Is that a problem for you? He said. She thought about it honestly. He could tell she was actually thinking about it, not performing deliberation. No, she said. If it makes the curriculum stronger, it's not a problem. She paused. Halford isn't going to like it. Halford pulled his challenge, Cole said. He made a decision about what he wanted. I'm giving him something he didn't ask for. Whether he likes it is up to him. She almost smiled. It was a very small, almost. 1 page, she said. Give me 30 minutes. The briefing with Svensson at 0800 was in the second-floor conference room where Cole had first sat across from the Admiral 8 days earlier. It felt different now. Same bad carpet, same institutional lighting, same narrow windows. But the shape of the meeting was different. Svensson was at the head of the table, and he had the Sandia report in front of him, and his body language was the body language of a man who had expected one kind of meeting and was adjusting to another. Dryden was there again. Same expression. Cole and Elena sat across from each other. Svensson looked at the report, then at Elena. Dr. Reyes's group, he said. You initiated the review before the challenge was filed. Yes, Elena said. You anticipated the challenge. I anticipated a validity argument, she said. The challenge was one form it could take. Svensson looked at Cole. And you were aware of this. I became aware of it the night the challenge was filed, Cole said. Commander Voss had the Sandia review in motion before I knew. When I found out, I supported accelerating the timeline. Svensson looked at the report again. He turned 3 pages without reading them. A man checking the weight of a document rather than its content. The working group session is in 2 hours, Svensson said. I need to know what you're bringing. Cole set the 1-page document Elena had written on the table and slid it across. Svensson looked at it. He read it. Actually read it. Not the weight check, but the content. His expression didn't change significantly, but his posture did. A slight forward movement, the body language of attention. You're proposing to integrate Commander Halford's sensor architecture as a supplemental component, Svensson said. As a training phase calibration tool, Cole said, operators learn environmental reading first. The sensor package provides a measured confirmation layer during skill development. In the field, when sensors aren't available, the perceptual skill operates independently. When sensors are available, they augment it. This would require additional funding, Svensson said. Less than Halford's original proposal, Cole said, because the sensor package isn't the primary delivery mechanism. It's supplemental. You're not funding a sensor-based program. You're funding a perception-based program with a sensor-assisted training component. Svensson looked at Dryden. Dryden looked at the one-page document. This addresses the institutional opposition, Dryden said. If Halford's work is incorporated, partially, Cole said, it incorporates the tool. The methodology is Voss's. That doesn't change. But Halford's contribution is acknowledged, Dryden said. His sensor package is a good piece of engineering, Cole said. It solves a real problem. It's better used as a training tool than as a rejected proposal. Dryden set the document down. He looked at Svensson with the expression of a man recalculating a budget line. Svensson looked at Elena Voss. You're comfortable with this integration, he said. Technically, yes, she said. The sensor data strengthens the training. I'd want design authority over how it's incorporated into the curriculum structure. Meaning? Meaning the methodology sequence doesn't change, she said. Operators learn environmental reading first, without sensors. The sensor calibration phase comes after baseline perceptual skill is established. I won't run it the other way around. Instrument dependency first, then perception. That produces the problem the program is designed to solve. Svensson looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. You agree with the sequencing requirement, Svensson said. Completely, Cole said. You build the skill without the crutch, then you add the crutch as a check. If you do it in reverse, you never develop the underlying capability. Like learning to navigate before you're given a GPS, Dryden said. Exactly like that, Cole said. Svensson sat back. He looked at the Sandia report. He looked at the one-page integration proposal. He looked at the two people sitting across from each other at his conference table who had spent 8 days building something in the space between an admiral's directive and an institutional challenge from a man who'd had a legitimate grievance and who had managed to turn both the directive and the grievance into something that was probably, not certainly, but probably, stronger than either of them had expected to produce. All right, Svensson said, take it to the working group. The working group session lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. Cole had been in his share of institutional deliberations, the particular theater of military decision-making, where the actual decision is often made in the hallway beforehand, and the session itself is the documentation. But this one was different. The Sandia report changed the texture of the room from the moment Torres distributed copies. The language in it, consistent with documented microthermal behavior, confirms validity of observational methodology. Atmospheric phenomena align with established meteorological principles, was not the language of academic ambiguity. It was the language of a research institution that had looked at the data and come back with a clear answer. The 3 working group members read it in near silence. One of them, Commander Patricia Eng, who ran long-range evaluation metrics for the division, read it twice. She was the neutral vote. Cole watched her. When the presentations began, Cole spoke first. He delivered the operational assessment he'd been formulating since his drive back from Raven Ridge. Not a performance, not a sales pitch, but the methodical account of a 20-year SEAL sniper operator who had stood at a range, witnessed something he initially dismissed, reconsidered his dismissal, and arrived at a specific conclusion. He spoke about the drift pattern analysis he'd built from the 13 impact data points. He spoke about independent replication of the analytical framework. He spoke about the 3 weeks of pre-curriculum training and what it had changed in his own technical understanding. He spoke about 6 inches, not the phrase, the fact, the margin between his best and the target, and what he had learned in the intervening days about where that margin lived and how it could be closed. The working group was quiet while he spoke. Elena presented the curriculum structure, methodical, precise, without decoration. The sequencing requirements, the training progression, the skill benchmarks, the environmental module breakdown. She was not trying to convince anyone of anything beyond the technical content, and the technical content didn't need persuasion. It was clear and it was grounded, and the Sandia report was sitting on the table beside it, confirming the foundation. When Cole presented the integration proposal, Halford's sensor package as a calibration tool, Commander Eng looked up from her copy of the document. "This addresses the Halford challenge," Eng said. "The Halford challenge has been withdrawn," Cole said. "I know," Eng said. "This addresses the underlying problem anyway." "Yes," Cole said. "That was the intention." Eng looked at Elena. "You designed the sequencing requirement." "Yes," Elena said. "Perception before instrumentation," Eng said. "Yes." "That's going to be a harder sell to the cohort than the alternative," Eng said. "Operators are used to data. You're asking them to trust sensory input that they can't quantify." "I'm asking them to learn to quantify it differently," Elena said. "The sensors give them a bridge. They can cross-check their environmental reads against the measured data until the reads become reliable enough that the cross-check becomes routine rather than necessary." "How long does that take?" Eng said. "It varied across the field evaluation candidates," Elena said. "The fastest progression was 6 weeks to baseline reliability. The slowest was 14, and those who couldn't get there?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "2 of the 4 field evaluation candidates didn't complete the program," she said. "1 withdrew voluntarily, 1 was separated for medical reasons. The withdrawal was in week 4. He was making progress but decided the cognitive demand wasn't compatible with his other operational commitments. He quit," said one of the other working group members. "A naval commander named Rice, who had the skeptical energy of someone who'd approved a lot of programs and watched a lot of them underdeliver. He made a decision about his priorities," Elena said, "which is information. Not everyone is suited to this training. That's not a program failure. That's a selection problem, which is why cohort selection criteria matter." Rice looked at her. "What are your selection criteria?" "Cognitive profile weighted toward environmental sensitivity and pattern recognition," she said. "Operational background in long-range precision work, specific temperament markers around patience and tolerance for ambiguity, and direct assessment. I need to observe candidates in a field environment for at least 48 hours before I'll recommend them for the cohort." "You want to watch them," Rice said. "I want to see what they pay attention to when they think no one is assessing them," she said. "What people notice when they're not performing is more useful than what they demonstrate when they are." The room was quiet for a moment. Cole looked at the table. He was thinking about a morning at Raven Ridge when a woman nobody had introduced was standing at the edge of the observation platform, watching the valley floor, while everyone else checked equipment and reviewed sensor data. I was thinking about what she'd been doing and how long she'd been doing it, and how completely invisible that doing had been to everyone present, including himself. He was thinking about what it cost to miss what was right in front of you. Eng had been watching Elena during this exchange. She looked at her copy of the curriculum document. She turned to the final page, the cohort selection criteria, written out in the same precise, unadorned language as everything else. "I'm recommending approval," Eng said. The room shifted slightly. Rice looked at her. "Patricia," Rice said. "The Sandia findings are solid," Eng said. "The methodology is validated at the foundation level. The curriculum structure is sound. The integration of the sensor component addresses the institutional gap." She looked at Rice. "And we've had a 20-year SEAL sniper sit in front of us and tell us it works. That's the operational credibility this program needed." Rice looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him steadily. "How sure are you?" Rice said. Cole thought about this honestly. He thought about the mountain canyon diagrams on Elena's whiteboard, the cold air drainage flowing toward lower elevation, the turbulence zone in the middle third of the trajectory that you had to read before the shot because you couldn't correct for it after. He thought about the framework he'd been building in his head for 3 weeks, the places where it fit cleanly with what he already knew and the places where it asked him to let go of something he'd been holding for years. "Sure enough to put my name on it," Cole said, "which is the most honest answer I can give you." A pause. "Good enough," Eng said. Rice looked at the Sandia report for a long moment, then he set it down. "Approved," he said, "conditionally. Cohort selection by the criteria as written, with Commander Voss retaining final selection authority. Sensor integration as a training phase tool, sequenced per the curriculum design. 6-month evaluation checkpoint before any expansion beyond the initial cohort." "Agreed," Cole said. The third working group member, who had barely spoken through the entire session, signed the approval document without fanfare. Torres collected the documents. The room began to move again, people standing, chairs scraping, the reanimation that follows the moment of decision. Cole stood. He picked up his folder. He looked across the table at Elena, who was gathering her own materials with the same economy of motion she brought to everything. She looked up and met his eyes. She gave him a single nod. Not triumphant, just acknowledging. The nod of someone who has moved a stone a long distance and has arrived at the place where it was supposed to go. And the arrival is real, but it doesn't require a ceremony. Cole nodded back. In the hallway afterward, Svensson stopped beside him while Elena was talking to Torres about the cohort selection timeline. "That was well done," Svensson said, quietly enough that it didn't carry. "She did the work," Cole said. "You kept it from collapsing," Svensson said. "That's a different kind of work." Cole looked down the hallway. "Halford," he said. "When the cohort is selected, if he's willing, his sensor development experience would be useful in the technical integration phase." Svensson looked at him. "You want to bring him in," Svensson said. "I want to give him a way to contribute what he built," Cole said. "That's different from bringing him in." Svensson was quiet for a moment. "I'll reach out," he said. "It'll be his choice." "I know," Cole said. "Most things are." Svensson moved away down the corridor and Cole stood in the institutional hallway with its fluorescent lights and its framed photos and its smell of carpet and coffee and processed air, and he thought about 14 months and 12%, and a man sitting alone in a bar with a beer he'd barely touched, and he thought about the particular taxonomy of losses that don't have clean resolution, only the possibility of a different direction from here. That was going to have to be enough. It usually was. The hallway emptied the way hallways do after decisions, quickly, without ceremony, everyone dispersing back toward the work that the decision had now made real. Cole stood for another minute after Svensson left, not because he needed to, but because something in him wanted 30 seconds of stillness before the next thing started. The fluorescent light above him was not flickering. It was steady and unremarkable, and it illuminated a corridor that looked exactly like it had an hour ago. And the fact that something significant had just happened inside it was entirely invisible to the physical space, which was indifferent to significance in the way that all institutional spaces are. He walked outside. The marine layer had burned off, exactly as expected. The sky over Coronado was the particular blue that the California coast produces on clear autumn mornings. Deep, without haze, the kind of blue that makes distances look shorter than they are. Cole stood on the steps of the building and breathed it for a moment, the salt air and the warmth that was building toward noon. His phone buzzed. Walsh. Working group? Cole. Approved. 3 seconds. Walsh. Good. That was it. No elaboration, no celebration. Walsh, who had been in this from the beginning, who had driven back from Raven Ridge in the dark, and called Cole from outside a briefing room and said he's already talking. Careful. Walsh, whose economy of language was not a lack of feeling, but the opposite of it. Cole put his phone away and went to find Hale. Victor Hale was in the facility gym, which was not where Cole expected to find a 63-year-old retired Master Chief at 10:45 on a Wednesday morning, but which, on reflection, was exactly where Hale would be. He was on a rowing machine, working at a pace that most men 20 years younger would find uncomfortable, not performing effort, but simply applying it, the same way he did everything. Cole sat on the bench beside the machine and waited. Hale finished his interval. He stopped, picked up a towel, pressed it to his face. He breathed for a moment. Working group approved it, Cole said. Hale nodded. He wasn't surprised. Or if he was, he didn't express it, which amounted to the same thing. Sensor integration, Hale said. As a calibration tool during the training phase, Cole said. Elena's sequencing requirement stands. Hale draped the towel over his knees and looked at the far wall of the gym. Halford, he said. I talked to him Monday night, Cole said. He withdrew the challenge Tuesday morning. Hale turned to look at him. You talked to him yourself, Hale said. Yes. How did that go? He told me my program would have worked, Cole said. I told him I believed him. We had a beer and he thought about it overnight and pulled the challenge. Hale was quiet for a moment. And the integration proposal. He doesn't know about it yet, Cole said. Svensson's going to reach out. It'll be his choice whether he wants to contribute. Hale looked at him with the expression that Cole had seen in the small moments of the last 3 weeks. The one that was too complicated to be called pride and too specific to be called anything else. It was the expression of a man who has spent a long time building things he can't entirely take credit for, watching those things move on their own. You didn't need to do that, Hale said. The program was approved without it. I know, Cole said. But a program that fixes the problem that created the opposition is more durable than one that just survives it. Hale put the towel down. He stood up from the rowing machine, slowly, with the deliberate movement of a man who understands which parts of himself need to be managed carefully at 63. And he stretched his shoulders and looked at Cole. She's going to run something important, Hale said. You understand that? Yes, Cole said. You're going to spend the next 2 years being the secondary name on a curriculum that most people will eventually associate with her. I know that too, Cole said. That's it okay with you? Hale said. Cole thought about it. He thought about it honestly, the way Elena had been honest with him about the self-referential component of her methodology. Not performing comfort with the answer, but actually checking whether he felt it. Most of the things worth doing, Cole said. You're not the primary name on. You're in the room. You're part of what makes it work. That's enough. Hale looked at him for a long moment. It took me 30 years to arrive at that conclusion, Hale said. You had a head start, Cole said. Hale made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh that Cole had heard from him in 3 weeks. It was brief and real, and it disappeared as quickly as it came. Get back to work, Hale said. The cohort selection began 3 weeks later. Elena had identified 11 candidates across 5 units, SEAL teams, Marine Raider battalions, 1 Army Special Forces operator whose unit commander had submitted an unsolicited nomination with a 3-page letter that Elena had read twice. The candidates didn't know they were being evaluated when the preliminary observation phase began. That was intentional, and it was Elena's, and Cole had agreed with it completely when she'd explained it to the working group. I need to see what they pay attention to when they think no one is watching. Cole participated in the field observation phase alongside her. They spent 6 days at a training facility in the Mojave, a low-profile site that ran combined arms exercises and had enough operational texture that the candidates were genuinely focused on the task in front of them, not on being observed. Elena watched them the way she watched everything, not from behind glass, not through reports, but from the ground. She was present in the training environment, moving quietly through the periphery of exercises, watching where eyes went, what people noticed, when they paused, and why. She didn't talk much during this phase. Cole talked even less. They developed a working shorthand over the weeks of pre-curriculum sessions, the ability to communicate efficiently in the field where full sentences were an indulgence. On the 3rd day, Cole watched one of the candidates, a SEAL petty officer named Drummond, late 20s, quiet in the way of men who process externally before they speak, crouch down during a movement exercise and press 2 fingers to the desert floor. He wasn't checking for tripwire. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was feeling the ground. He held the contact for 4 seconds, then stood and adjusted his route by 30 degrees without explaining it to his partner. Cole turned and found Elena already looking at him. You saw it, she said. He felt something in the ground and adjusted his route, Cole said. He didn't know why he was doing it. He was doing it on instinct. That's the profile, she said. Sensory data that precedes conscious analysis. The instinct is the skill in its undeveloped form. She watched Drummond moving through the exercise. He's been doing this his whole life. He just doesn't have a framework for it. That's what you're going to give him, Cole said. That's what we're going to give him, she said. Cole looked at her. You've been doing this your whole life too, she said. The drift pattern analysis from the 13 impact data points. You built that on instinct before you built it on method. You sensed the pattern before you could articulate it. She paused. That's why Hale wanted you here. Not the credibility, the profile. Cole was quiet for a moment. He could have told me that, Cole said. You wouldn't have believed it from him, she said. You needed to discover it yourself. Cole looked at the desert. The afternoon heat was building, not Nevada brutal, but serious, the kind that made the air above the ground shimmer in the lower registers of the mirage band. He could read the mirage now. Not perfectly, Not Elena's level, not even close. But he could see what it was telling him, could identify the thermal structures and the direction of the microcurrents, could feel the information in it the way you feel the grain of wood before you cut it. 3 weeks ago, he couldn't do that. He played us both, Cole said. Probably, Elena said. It worked. That's not the point, he said. It's a little bit the point, she said, and she walked back toward the observation position, and Cole followed her, and neither of them said anything else about it. What? By the end of the 6-day observation phase, Elena had selected 7 of the 11 candidates for the cohort. The 4 who were cut received notification through their chains of command, no explanation beyond not selected for this evaluation cycle. And that was that. Clean. Elena had no sentimentality about selection. Either the profile was there or it wasn't, and manufacturing cohort size for the appearance of success was something she'd made clear she would not do. Drummond was selected. So was a Marine Raider captain named Okafor, a woman who turned out to have a background in amateur meteorology that she'd never mentioned to anyone because it hadn't seemed relevant to her military career until now. And the Special Forces operator with the 3-page nomination letter, a quiet man named Park, who during the entire 6-day observation phase had demonstrated the particular quality of attention that made Elena and Cole look at each other twice on day 2 and not need to discuss it further. The first formal curriculum session was on a Monday. Cole stood in front of the classroom, the same room he'd been learning in for 3 weeks, now arranged for a cohort of 7 instead of 2. And he felt the particular weight of being on the teaching side of a room for the first time in a context that actually scared him. Not performance fear, the other kind. The fear of getting it wrong, of misrepresenting something true, of being the translation layer between a genuine methodology and the people who needed to learn it, and being an imperfect translation. He'd told Elena about this during one of the late sessions, not as a confession, but as operational information. She needed to know if he was uncertain about something, because uncertainty that wasn't communicated became error. She'd looked at him for a moment. "The fear is correct," she'd said. "Stay scared. It keeps you accurate." He'd thought about that for 2 days before he understood what she meant. He stood in front of the classroom now and looked at 7 operators who had no idea what was about to be asked of them, and he felt the fear exactly where she'd told him to feel it, and he used it the way she'd meant for him to use it. "Here's what this program is going to ask you to do," he said. "It's going to ask you to stop trusting your instruments before you've learned to trust something older. It's going to ask you to be uncomfortable in a way that doesn't look like a physical challenge, which is going to be harder than a physical challenge for most of you, because you know how to suffer through physical things. This is different." He paused. "I've been doing this for 3 weeks. I'm still bad at parts of it. I'm going to be teaching you some things from about 4 steps ahead of where you are, which means I'm close enough to remember what it felt like to not know it." He looked at them. "That's useful. Use it." Elena stepped to the front beside him. She didn't introduce herself. They all knew who she was. Word had moved through the community at the speed that significant things always moved, so that by the time each of them had received their selection notification, they'd already heard something about a woman at Raven Ridge and a steel plate at 4,000 meters in 2 rounds, when 13 men had fired 39. The story, as stories do, had grown in the telling. Some of what was circulating was accurate. Some of it was the particular enhancement that happens when a thing is passed from person to person across a community that is both deeply skeptical and deeply hungry for things worth believing in. Elena did not address the story. She walked to the whiteboard and began drawing the atmospheric diagram for the first module, the high desert baseline, with the same dense, annotated precision she always used, and the room fell into the specific quiet of people who are paying serious attention, and the curriculum began. 6 months later, Drummond put a round on a 3,000-meter target in degraded wind conditions during a joint evaluation at a training facility in Arizona. He used no sensor assistance. His spotter fed him standard atmospheric data from the position array. He listened to it, incorporated it, and then set it aside in the final 30 seconds before the shot, not discarding it, but filtering it through a layer of direct environmental reading that corrected the sensor data's blind spots in the valley's thermal structure. First round. Center mass. The evaluator on the range, a Marine gunnery sergeant who'd been running precision evaluations for 11 years and who had no particular investment in the outcome, wrote in his report, "Shooter demonstrated environmental awareness beyond instrument data. Corrected for atmospheric variable not captured by sensor array. Hit confirmed. Cole was not present for the shot. He heard about it that evening from Elena, who delivered the information with the same flat, factual economy she used for everything. Drummond hit at 3,000, she said. First round. Cole set down what he was reading. What conditions? He said. Variable crosswind. Thermal inversion between sensor positions 2 and 4. She paused. He felt it in the flag behavior and adjusted before his final breath cycle. Cole was quiet for a moment. He felt it, Cole said. Yes, she said. Cole looked at the window. The marine layer was back. It came back every few days, the predictable rhythm of the coastal atmosphere doing what it did. Okafor, he said. 2 weeks behind Drummond in the progression. She'll get there. Elena set her folder down. Park is further along than either of them. His pattern recognition is the fastest I've seen in the field evaluation cohort. Faster than yours, Cole said. She considered this honestly. In the initial learning curve, yes. What he does in year 3 of practice, I don't know yet. Cole nodded. This was the part of teaching that nobody warned you about. He was finding the specific quality of watching something you built in yourself be built faster and better in someone else. It was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. It was just what teaching was. The point of the transmission was for the transmission to exceed the transmitter. That was the whole thing. Halford's coming in Thursday, Elena said. Cole looked at her. Svensson's office set it up, she said. He agreed to consult on the sensor integration phase. 2 days a week. He'll work with the cohort on the calibration protocol. How did he sound? Cole said. When you talked to him. Svensson talked to him, she said. I didn't. Are you going to? She was quiet for a moment. Eventually, she said. When there's a reason to. Having him in the building might be reason enough, Cole said. She looked at him. You want me to clear the air? I want you to not have 14 months of someone else's frustration sitting unaddressed in the same room where your cohort trains, Cole said. That's different from clearing the air. She considered this. I'll talk to him, she said. On my terms. Of course, he said. She picked up her folder. Cole, she said. He looked up. The working group approved a second cohort, she said. 8 candidates. Selection starts in 4 months. He looked at her. They also approved a budget line for the sensor package production run, she said. 50 units. Halford's original design spec, modified for the calibration application. She paused, and there was something in the pause that was not quite the almost smile from weeks ago, but was in the same family. A very small acknowledgement of something that had cost more than it looked like and had arrived somewhere worth arriving at. His name is on the production documentation. Engineering credit. Cole was quiet. You pushed for that, he said. Svensson pushed for it, she said. I agreed it was appropriate. Elena. I agreed it was appropriate, she repeated, with the firmness of someone who has decided how a fact will be stated and is not moving from that decision. And she left. Cole sat in the empty classroom for a while. The atmospheric diagrams on the whiteboard had been updated and expanded across 6 months of curriculum development. The original desert module now accompanied by mountain canyon, coastal marine layer, urban heat island, and the beginnings of an Arctic application that Elena had been developing quietly in the early mornings before the day's sessions started. The diagrams covered most of 2 whiteboards and had the layered, annotated density of something that had been built up over time rather than arrived at whole. Cole looked at them for a while. He thought about the morning at Raven Ridge when he'd watched a woman he'd never heard of press her bare feet to burning concrete and close her eyes, and the specific contempt, he was honest enough now to call it that had passed through him in that moment. The certainty that whatever she was doing, it was not what serious people did in serious environments. He thought about 6 inches. He thought about the drift pattern from 13 shooters' impact data, and the flag at position 3 running its stuttering irregular movement, and the moment the shot connected and the sound traveled 4,000 meters back across the desert valley and arrived in his eardrums as the cleanest possible statement of a thing he'd been wrong about. He thought about Drummond pressing 2 fingers to the desert floor during a movement exercise, not knowing why. The instinct arriving before the framework, the skill living in him already in its undeveloped form, waiting for someone to show him what it was. He stood up. He went to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. He found the place in the coastal marine layer module where the diagram had an incomplete section. The interaction between the thermal inversion and the fog boundary at the upper marine layer, a phenomenon he'd been working through for 3 weeks and hadn't fully resolved. He looked at it. He thought about the last 3 days of weather over Coronado. The marine layer coming in at 800 feet, burning off by 10, the temperature differential at the burn-off boundary creating a brief but predictable turbulence zone that he'd been watching from his kitchen window every morning. He drew. Not a finished diagram, a working one, rough in places, with notes written beside it that were more questions than answers. But the structure of it was there, the shape of the phenomenon, the way the atmospheric layers interacted at the boundary, and what it meant for a bullet traveling through that boundary at the mid-trajectory point. He stared at it for a moment. Then he took a photo of it on his phone and sent it to Elena with no text. Her response came 4 minutes later. 3 words. Show me tomorrow. Lawrence Halford arrived on Thursday at 0800, which was 20 minutes before anyone had told him to arrive, because that was who he was and probably always had been. He was in civilian clothes, khaki pants, a plain gray shirt, and he carried a laptop bag and a rolled set of engineering drawings that Cole assumed were the modified sensor package schematics. Cole met him in the corridor outside the classroom. They shook hands. It was not a warm handshake and not a cold one. It was the handshake of 2 men who have a complicated history and have both decided to operate from where they are now rather than from where they were. And that decision doesn't make the history disappear, but it changes what the history is for. "The cohort know I'm coming?" Halford said. Elena briefed them on the sensor integration phase, Cole said. "They know there's an engineering contributor. They may have figured out who." Halford nodded. He looked at the classroom door. "She in there?" "She will be at 0900, Cole said. "Am I early?" Halford said. "You're Halford," Cole said. "You're always early." Halford looked at him. Something in his face shifted. Not quite humor, but the territory adjacent to it, where a man allows something to be true without fighting it. "You ran with something I built," Halford said, "even after I tried to kill it." "I ran with something that worked," Cole said. "What you built was part of why it worked." "Don't oversell it," Halford said. "I'm not," Cole said. "The sensor calibration layer legitimately strengthens the training. That's not politics, that's methodology." Halford looked at the classroom door again. "She designed the sequencing." "Yes." "Perception before instrumentation." "Yes." "She's right about that," Halford said. "I didn't want to admit it when the program was in competition. But she's right. You build the dependency before the skill and you've got operators who can't function when the sensors fail." He said it flatly, without decoration, the way engineers acknowledge a better solution when they finally decide to stop not acknowledging it. "You could have said that 8 months ago," Cole said. "I know," Halford said. "I wasn't ready to say it 8 months ago." Cole looked at him. "Were you ready to hear it 8 months ago?" Halford said. Cole thought about a woman at an observation platform watching the valley floor while he checked his equipment. He thought about the specific timestamp of when he'd started actually watching what she was doing versus performing indifference to it. "No," Cole said. "Then we were both 8 months behind," Halford said. "Might as well start from here." Cole opened the classroom door. The cohort session that Thursday was the first one with Halford present, and it had the particular texture of any first session where a new element is added to an established dynamic. Slightly formal at the edges, everyone aware that the room had changed, nobody quite sure yet what the changed room was. Halford sat in the back for the first hour and said nothing, which was the right call and which Cole suspected hadn't been easy for him. Elena ran the session, the advanced desert application, the third-level module, where the cohort was working on reading compound inversion structures, where 2 or more thermal boundaries interacted and created interference patterns that required holding multiple data streams simultaneously. It was the hardest material in the desert curriculum. Drummond was the furthest along, Park was right behind him. Okafor was working through the interference pattern concept with the focused frustration of someone who understands what they're reaching for and hasn't quite closed the gap. Elena ran a live demonstration. She set up a scaled environment, a heat table with surface temperature controls that could simulate different terrain types, and walked the cohort through reading the compound inversion pattern in real time, narrating her own observation process in the flat, precise language she used when she was making the invisible visible. Cole watched Halford during this. Halford was watching Elena with an expression that had nothing performative in it. He was watching the way he'd watched operators run exercises when he was still active. Not evaluating, not judging, just seeing. The particular quality of attention of someone who spent a career looking at how humans solve problems under pressure. After the session broke for the mid-morning interval, Halford came to stand beside Cole. "The compound inversion demonstration," Halford said. "That's the hardest thing in here, isn't it?" "So far," Cole said. "Okafor's not seeing it yet," Halford said. "She'll see it," Cole said. "She's analytical. She's trying to compute it rather than feel it. She'll get there when she stops trying to solve it and starts trying to read it." Halford was quiet for a moment. "That's a different kind of instruction than I've done." "It's a different kind of skill," Cole said. "The instruction has to match." Halford looked at the heat table where Elena was answering questions from two of the cohort members. "She's a good teacher," he said. "Just that. No qualification, no hedge." "Yes," Cole said. Halford picked up his laptop bag. "I'll have the modified sensor schematics to her by Friday," he said. "She'll want to review the calibration interface before we introduce it to the cohort." "She'll have notes," Cole said. "I expect she will," Halford said. And for the first time, something crossed his face that was cleanly and unambiguously what it looked like. A small, dry acknowledgement of a situation that had cost him something real and had arrived somewhere that was, if not what he'd planned for, at least honest. He walked toward the door, then stopped. "Cole," he said. Cole looked at him. "Your drift pattern analysis," Halford said. "From the 13 shooters at Raven Ridge. Did you write it up?" "Informally," Cole said. "Write it up formally," Halford said. "It's a valid methodology for post-engagement atmospheric reconstruction. Should be in the curriculum." Cole looked at him. "Module appendix," Halford said. "Your name on it." He walked out. The program's 6-month evaluation checkpoint produced a document that moved through the SOCOM assessment division with unusual speed for institutional paperwork, which was to say it moved at the pace of something that nobody wanted to slow down. First cohort completion rate, 7 of 7, which was not expected, and which the working group noted with the particular satisfaction of a body that has approved something and watched it exceed projections. Average skill acquisition timeline to baseline reliability, 9 weeks, compared to the 14-week worst-case estimate. Drummond's 3,000-meter evaluation was included as an operational demonstration. So were 2 other range evaluations from cohort members who had produced documented first-round hits under degraded conditions that their unit evaluators had classified as outside standard achievable parameters. The working group approved the second cohort. They also approved, in the same session, a preliminary review of a third cohort expansion that would extend the program to 2 additional services, the decision that Svensson had been working toward since before the first challenge. The decision that the whole structure of what had happened from Raven Ridge forward had been designed, in Hale's methodical and patient way, to make possible. Cole read the approval notification in his truck in the parking lot at 0700 on a Tuesday morning before the day's session started. He sat with it for a moment. Then he sent it to Elena. She responded from inside the building, where she had apparently already been for at least an hour. "Second cohort selection criteria are ready. I updated the observation protocol." He sent back, "When do we start?" Her response, "We already did." That evening, Cole drove north along the coast highway for no particular reason except that it was a clear night and he needed the movement. The Pacific was to his left, dark and enormous and making its continuous sound, the low-frequency rhythm that California coastal residents spend so much time hearing that they stop noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. He drove without music. He was thinking about the program's next phase, the Mountain Canyon module expansion, the Arctic application Elena had been developing, the second cohort's observation phase that had technically already begun. He was thinking about the modified sensor schematics that Halford had delivered to Elena on Friday and the 3 pages of notes she'd sent back by Saturday morning, and the working session they'd had on Monday that had been, by any measure, the most productive thing Halford had been part of in at least 8 months, which Cole suspected Halford knew but would not say in those words. He was thinking about Drummond pressing 2 fingers to the desert floor. He was thinking about the story the way it would eventually be told, not the version currently circulating, with its enhancements and its drama, but the actual version. A woman at a range in Nevada. a steel plate. The gap between what the instrument showed and what the air was doing, and the skill it takes to read the gap directly, and the years of work behind that skill, and the institutional resistance it met, and the complicated human machinery required to move that resistance and get the knowledge to the people who needed it. The story was not clean. It was not a perfect arc. Halford had been wounded and had acted from the wound, and the wound had been legitimate even if the action wasn't. Cole had dismissed what was right in front of him and had paid for it in the currency of 6 inches and a better understanding of the architecture of his own assumptions. Hale had played a long game with pieces he'd arranged over years, and some of that arrangement had been in service of the program, and some of it had been in service of what he believed Cole needed to see about himself. And both of those things were true simultaneously, and neither fully described the other. And Elena had built something real from a problem that most people had decided wasn't solvable in the way she was solving it. She'd built it from 243 documented misses and 18 months in a small room and years in the field and a framework she'd constructed from the ground up. And she'd carried it through institutional resistance and a formal challenge, and the particular quiet contempt of a culture that has a very specific idea of what authority looks like. And she'd put it in front of a working group with Sandia's name on the foundation and Cole's name on the co-instruction and Halford's name on the production documentation, and the program was real now. It existed. It was teaching people things that changed what they were capable of. That was the whole story. Not clean, not simple, not the version that would circulate, but the actual one. Cole drove until the highway turned inland and the ocean sound faded, and then he turned around and came back along the coast, the water still dark and enormous to his right now. And he drove south toward Coronado with the window down and the night air moving through the cab in the way that marine air moves, cool, salt-edged, carrying the smell of the deep water that was out there beyond the visible surface, beyond the first 6 feet, doing what it had always done in the dark. 3 years later, recruits at the Advanced Precision Engagement course heard the story about Raven Ridge, the way military stories travel, piecemeal, embellished at the edges, true at the core. 14 snipers, some version of it went. Some said 15. A plate at 4,000 meters. 39 rounds. 1 woman, 2 shots. The number varied depending on who was telling it. The plate never moved from 4,000. The 2 shots never became 3. The instructors, when asked, and they were asked, didn't add to the telling or subtract from it. They ran the curriculum. They watched the candidates. They waited to see who pressed their fingers to the ground without being told to, who watched the flags before they watched the sensors, who read the air between the data points. And in those moments, in the moment a candidate turned from the observation platform and looked at the valley floor with a specific quality of attention, the attention of someone who had just understood that the environment was not something to be measured from outside, but something to be read from within. In those moments, something moved through the room that was not taught and not performed, and not the result of any documentation or any evaluation rubric. It was just the skill, finding the people who already had it in its undeveloped form, waiting, as it always had, to be named. The greatest distance is not measured in meters. It is measured in the space between what you are certain you know and what you have not yet learned to see.